Coming up this week on the Markcast, one could argue there are many costs associated with spring football. Physical costs, emotional costs, mental costs. Today we are talking the economic cost of spring football. Now that the USFL is getting their CBA figured out, we are doing full salary breakdowns. Who is getting paid more? XFL, USFL, and then because we don't just podcast one football league on the show, we are including CFL in the mix as well. What is the cost of spring football?
What did it cost?
Everything.
Loaded show as always this week, getting him in right before the holidays, just like we did last year. XFL insider Mike Mitchell, I think, is coming in guns loaded today. I'm really excited.
You know, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, and I always get a lot of heat for a lot of the stuff that I say. It almost appears, Reed, as if the people who are running the XFL have never operated a sports league before. So that's heavy to say that, but it's the truth.
And then it's time to go back to class. I know we're on winter break, but the professor is back in session. We have Andrew Murray coming back on. Like I said, I got spreadsheets, I got charts, XFL, USFL, breaking down all the different payment calculations.
I agree with your analogy there. It is very much like betting on yourself. It is not only just playing in the league and being a starter, maybe even playing well and being on a good team. It really is a bit more of a gamble. It's like, if you're going to do this, you better be sure that you know what your skill level is. If you're going to be on the active roster, if you think that the coaches are going to trust you, if you think they're going to put you in good positions, if you think that where you're going to go is going to be the best fit for you, if you really believe that, then yes, absolutely ride with that train.
And then going outside of our bubble, really excited to bring back the CFL super agent, Darren Gill. Darren has been a sports agent for 20 plus years. Players in the NFL, the CFL. He has lots of things to say about how these new salaries for both the XFL and the USFL affect players wanting to go up north to the CFL.
The balance around trying to be a minor league but act like a major league is really kind of how I see it. And my long-term concern would be is they're minor league sports that are trying to act grown up. And I don't know if that works as well, because that costs a lot of money.
And then coming off of their negotiations last week, able to talk to the media now, Kenneth Farrow and Ryan Cave of the United Football Players Association coming on, sharing their thoughts about the newly agreed upon USFL tentative CBA.
I think that USFL did a great job of getting through the first season and then obviously bringing the guys to the table to hear out the concerns and the things moving forward. I think we were able to get a lot of things changed, and I think it's just a little bit of a different tone going into the XFL. I don't think guys are too worried about some of the issues that were major concerns going into the USFL.
Happy holidays from everyone at the Markcast. Hope you have a good one. Hey guys, welcome to the Markcast. Reed here. Was really hoping for a late Christmas miracle here as we are sitting here the week before Christmas. Nonetheless, St. Nick did not come. The XFL Vegas Vipers still homeless as I record this today. Lots of things to talk about, including that. Lots of stuff happening in the world of alternative football this week, but the Vegas Vipers still homeless as we record this. We will see. Do we get anything before the new year? You tell me. Comment below on the YouTube. Do we get a XFL Vegas Vipers announcement before 2023? Dying to know. As I said off the top, loaded guest list this week. First and foremost, XFL insider Mike Mitchell coming back on. Very excited to talk with Mike. Mike was in my DMs. We got a lot to talk about. I said, all right, buddy, we'll strap in, ready to go. I'm sure we will be talking the Vegas Vipers deal. How many players do want to go from the XFL to the USFL? Mike was the one that reported that a few weeks ago. We will talk with Mike about all of that and more, I promise you. Then, like I said, Andrew Murray, professor, the class is back in session. Lots of work went in this week, putting together this spreadsheet, balancing, showing all the different salary scenarios for the XFL and the USFL. We're getting local tax rates and things. Lots of work went into that, including listener Max. Really appreciate that. So, if you like the comprehensive work we try to do on here, including, as I said off the top, getting CFL super agent Darren Gill coming on. Really appreciate that, doing the additional breakdowns this week, like I said, with the spreadsheet, and then getting Darren Gill on. I think he is a really unique outside perspective as someone that Is he getting as many calls now? Players wanting to go up north. We have 2 leagues starting here, competitive pay, whether you're into the XFL or the USFL, having both of those leagues as, equal then at least starting salaries to the CFL, that certainly adds a wrinkle to that. All these people on Facebook that say, why are you posting all this XFL and USFL stuff in the CFL groups? This is why. If spring leagues are able to be sustainable, and we'll see USFL here entering year 2, but if you're able to be sustainable there, that is going to start chipping away from those players going north. I really appreciate that. Like I said, Darren coming on the week of Christmas, busy guy, end of the year. So if you appreciate this additional work we're doing, thank you so much. Like and subscribe. And I really appreciate Kenneth Farrow and Ryan Cave coming on from the United Football Players Association. Kenneth, president, Ryan, part of the leadership there. I was talking with Ryan a lot last week, through the weekend, getting a lot of details for our spreadsheet. And then obviously they could not do any of the media stuff last week with the negotiations still going on. So really appreciate them obviously coming on this week as soon as they were able to do that. Really appreciate them. Again, setting up time. We're doing all this. I was just going to have Mike Mitchell on this week. We were going to do voicemails, whatever, and then all this comes down. I want to make sure you guys have the best, best content, do what I can on here. Like I said, bringing in Darren, all that stuff. So loaded show today, Mike Mitchell, Andy Murray, going back to the classroom, Darren Gill, and then the leadership over at the United Football Players Association. Like I said, like and subscribe, get your chance, getting this Brian Scott signed football here. We are rapidly approaching 2,500 subscribers, less than 140, I think, at this point. Can't even remember. Getting close to that. And then happy holidays from everybody. Whatever you choose to celebrate, we are going to be doing Christmas with the families and stuff this weekend. I went and saw Avatar: The Way of the Water. That was very exciting. Dorothy is off for winter break, whatever break it is right now. For school's working very hard. So hope everyone has a great holiday weekend. Should have another banger show next week. Remember, no weeks off on here. 124 weeks in a row here, approaching the end of 2022. Big guest next week, one of my longtime returning favorite guests coming back. We'll do kind of a year-end retrospective, and then another XFL approved guest coming on next week. What do you know about that? Another league approved guest from the XFL coming on. Really excited about that as we close out 2022. Like and subscribe. And I will say, I'll remind you at the end of the show, but I would like to do voicemails next week. So whatever your favorite moment from 2022, from this year, if we get a couple of them, I'll do them with the guest. If we get a lot, then I'll maybe bring someone else on or do it. But call in the markcast.com/voicemail. What was your favorite moment of 2022? USFL championship game, them completing the season, the XFL draft, the USFL draft, Grey Cup in the CFL, lots of things going on. So the markcast.com/voicemail. Call in. I want to hear from a lot of you. Like I said, depending on how many we get, if we get enough for a full segment, we'll do that. But I think that would be fun. What was your favorite moment? You can comment on the YouTube as well, but I really think the voicemails are fun. So please comment on the YouTube, help build that algorithm. But certainly leave a voicemail. We'll play it on the show. Thank you guys so much for your love and support. I'll talk to you guys at the end. Thanks. Well, it is a yearly tradition now. Last Christmas came on. Mike, I can't give you the sole episode this week because there is a lot going on. Because I was like, we're going to bring Mike back on, solo effort. But now we have Andy's coming on. We got a lot of other stuff going on. But obviously, we still got the star Mike Mitchell here. I appreciate that. How are you doing today, sir, just in general, first of all?
I'm doing all right. Happy holidays to you, Reed, and everyone out there who's listening to this, watching this. The holiday season can be a lot of fun, but it can also be stressful. So you got to try to balance it. And, life is life. So you just enjoy the good and the bad while you can.
So, we got this all set up and you DM me and I can't remember what it said, but it was like, we got a lot of stuff to talk about here. Like we really got to go. So I have questions here. We can go in any order, but what was on your mind of things that needed to be sorted out right away?
I think right now we're in a sweet spot. I know that, there's been a lot of dry spells all throughout this journey as we head towards 2023, but we're so close to the new year now. And with everything that's going on with the XFL, the USFL, NFL stuff right now, I know my Jets are about to, when this airs, the Jets are going to lose to the soon-to-be AFC South Jacksonville Jaguars. So I'll probably be miserable when I'm listening to this tomorrow. But we're in football heaven right now. For someone like me who's been an advocate of alternative non-NFL leagues my whole life since I was a kid, from the original USFL to the World League of American Football, NFL Europe, United Football League, the original XFL, and everything in between. Right now, we're headed towards a sweet spot. This is going to be a fascinating times up ahead, exciting times up ahead. If you love football, you got to love it.
What do you make? And we're going to do a deep dive. Andy's coming on. We're going to break down all the salaries, everything. I want to save you for a little bit more existential kind of, pontificating. Like thoughts, USFL CBA. We're minimum pay higher than the XFL. We're getting rid of win bonuses, giving housing stipends, all that. Like, what do you make of the USFL CBA?
I think it's tremendous. Shout out to Kenneth Farrow, Nick Temple, and everybody there. With that PA doing such a tremendous job. This is so great for the players. So this is a win. Right now, we're entering an area where it's win, 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 win for all these players. You're going to have over 800 players that are going to have jobs playing pro football in 2020 and 2023. And that's not the NFL, but close to it. And so I think it's great. The CBA for the USFL, there's tweaks here and there, but any raise in pay, any guarantee is a great thing. And I think Farrow, Temple, and everybody over there did a tremendous job, UFPA, putting that together. So I think that's great for the landscape, and it's great for players. So I like I said, I think the whole situation's win-win.
I don't know the answer to this, and that's why I'm asking. There's no bias. Like, was Fox, were they like, yeah, this is awesome? Or were they like, okay, twist my arm, we're going forward?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you for sure on that. There's no way they could avoid this, right? So just the way it came about. And I think when you look at the contracts, they're not absurd. Like, this isn't a situation where the union, these players through the Steelworkers Union, where they're all of a sudden making unreasonable demands on what is essentially a startup league. I think all of it is fair. There's trade-offs, eliminating the win bonuses, how things are covered as far as lodging goes. There's just a little bit of a gray area there, but there's no doubt the players are, at least as a baseline, in a better situation than they were last year. And so that's great. And so as far as Fox, look, publicly, you'll never hear these companies saying, I wish there wasn't a union. But, you got to roll with the punches. So it's not like all of a sudden Fox, the players are going to get a percentage of revenue and all that, which would be a hindrance for a new league. That's unreasonable. So I think this is fair all around. And I think, it's a best case scenario for both sides, because, like I said, these corporations, companies, they don't want unions, but, you worry sometimes about the type of leverage that's given to one side over the other, and they want to be able to build the USFL. So as the league grows, hopefully, wishfully, there'll be more revenues and more profits and everything. But first things first. So year 2 coming up, and so far so good.
Obviously, you haven't heard the interview yet with Kenneth and Ryan. That's later in the show. I asked them, I said, you guys obviously came together union with the USFL players. It's a weird situation where Kenneth is going to be playing in the XFL, president of this players association. They're not doing the same thing with the XFL, right? Obviously, the XFL hasn't kicked off yet. But I said, why did you feel the need to do this with the USFL, not the XFL? And they said, well, basically, there were concerns we had with players in the USFL that we did not have with the XFL. I mean, that's their word. Like, what do you make of that situation? That feels weird to me.
It does feel weird, especially when you got 2 union heads who are currently XFL players. And I know you have Nick Cave on as well. He's another, important figure in all of this. It is a little bit strange. I think, the USFL situation, I've gotten a lot of flack for this online, but there've been a lot of players out there that have had some concerns, and they weren't too happy with the setup last year in terms of how lodging was taken care of or wasn't taken care of, in terms of their pay, and the situation of their living arrangement and everything else is difficult, So, so I think there were a lot of concerns there from players because, you're being shortchanged and having to come out of your own pocket to play in a league is tough as it is. And it's not like these players are being paid a ton of money to begin with. So there were some concerns with that. And then going into year two, there have been a lot of players that were worried, and perhaps some of their fears have been quelched here, taken care of, that were worried that if they're moving into a hub in Memphis, or if they're moving into a hub in Michigan, whether the league would take care of them, raise their pay a little bit, take care of the lodging, because, there's cost of living, taxes, everything else, trying to figure out how you're going to situate your family, friends, where you're going to live, who you're going to stay with. So I do think it's kind of interesting that it's not immediate right now with the XFL. Perhaps that's something that's coming down the road. Let's first things first, let the XFL get through their season and finish up things. But you would hope that the XFL would grow and take care of their players. The players are going to be paid well. There's a little bit more upside playing in the XFL because you have a downside in the USFL, a guaranteed base of money. But in the XFL, depending on what team you're on, you can make more money with more success that you have. And I know that the XFL has talked about this publicly. We'll see how they implement certain things about how they're looking to monetize and help players actually get out there more and market themselves. And we'll see. Proof will be in the pudding. They have to do that first. But I think there's more potential in the XFL. Doesn't hurt if you're playing in Texas, with all those nice tax breaks you got there. But right now, the USFL all the players that are returning for year two, and all the new acquisitions, they're going to be in a better situation. How much better remains to be seen.
Because, and we obviously with Eric last week got into this a little bit. We have more details here now coming out after, it was like such breaking news last week trying to fit him in. When I question these things, it's not questioning Kenneth and Ryan or the players. My job is not to defend Fox Sports. So when I look at these, everything's a compromise where it was an $850 win bonus per each player. Now they're all getting that, right? But it's not like they got $1,500 versus, you're moving it from one column to another, right? And I looked at the housing the same way. I said, well, that's great. They're giving them $400 a week now, but that's $525. They're not subsidizing that for hotels. So I'm sure they're sitting there and they're like, well, sure. If you want it that way versus another, right? It's like getting an allowance from your parents versus going out and we'll give you $400, but then that also covers, meals, housing versus, I'm just trying to look at where did Fox give back a little bit, kind of where did they concede while still being able to keep the bottom line kind of the same? Because they're not going to come in and say, we're going to give everybody 20 grand more. That's just not how it's going to work, right?
Right, and I think that's the concession in and of itself, because if the union wanted to, they could have played hardball in this situation and asked for a lot more perks, a lot more this. So I think, maybe perhaps Fox, and that group thinks this is a win for them because they didn't have to go, they had little trade-offs back and forth here to make it work. So I would, because honestly, the union could have, if they wanted to, pushed it further. And I know, the win bonus thing is fascinating because, it was like one of the best elements of XFL 1.0 was the win bonus structure. The idea behind it was, rewarding players for their success, but also, however you want to look at this, added motivation for players to play hard and want to win. And, there's already the motivation of making it to the NFL, but a lot of these players in these leagues, it's a big difference. If you're adding to if you can make a maximum of close to $100,000 in the XFL, it'll be like $93,000. If you're on a winning team, it's best case scenario. You have to be on a winning team, go undefeated, be active for all the games, win your playoff game, win championship. But you can make close to $100,000 in the league if you're in that kind of scenario. So it gives you added motivation. It makes players, at least from the ownership standpoint, their standpoint is that it makes players want to win and work harder. And then, so if you're already guaranteed money, you don't have to worry about, going all in. Risking it all, kind of, so to speak. So there's a lot of things you can weigh positive and negative, but I think overall, when you look at the whole picture, I think this is a positive. The thing I care about the most in this situation, because I really don't care about Fox, no disrespect to Redbird Capital and all that, I care about the players. So that's really who I want to win in this scenario. I want Redbird and Fox to win, because if they win and they make revenues and profits, these leagues exist. If they don't, they shut it down. So, and then there's no avenue for these players. So that's important too. But first and foremost, what I care about is the players.
Yeah, I just don't like congratulating big conglomerate. I have left, I worked in corporate for a long time. That's always my thing. And it could be football, could be anything. It's like, let's not give Apple kudos for, you got the carbon tax or whatever when you're paying off, or like, yeah, Fox, like, yes, this is a win for the, I just don't want to be, like break my arm trying to pat Fox, Fox Sports in the back of like, this is the most tremendous thing ever. Cause like you said, the players really could have made this a lot more contentious, I think, if they wanted to. But what leverage do they have? Are they going to go out and get other? I mean, you got to play. I mean, it's December 22nd. Like we're playing in a few months, so we kind of got to get this going. Yeah,
and I had discussions specifically with people in the union and people in Fox about this whole situation and related to the USFL. And the hope was that there weren't going to be negotiations that were unreasonable. And that there was a good, on the corporate side, the USFL side, there was hope that these players wouldn't like try to push things. And the conversations I had with the union was that, that they weren't going to be unreasonable, because they realized that, in their early going, these leagues, they need every profit revenue stream they can get. You can't just come in and say, give me 70%, give me 60%, give me a cut of revenues, give me this, give me that. Ticket sales, which we didn't get very much of that in the USFL last year. So you can't really ask for that, So you have to be reasonable. And I think that's where I'm not going to call the USFL side, the owner, or that group noble. But I will have more of a heroic spin for the union side, because they did a good job here. Yeah. Talking to them months ago, I had a feeling that this is the kind of deal that they were headed towards, and that they weren't going to cut off their nose to spite their face kind of deal. And so that's great.
Yeah. And Andy and I'll get into it. If you win bonuses or not, if you are on a team that has at least 2 wins in the XFL, it basically balances out. So, I mean, you would have to be on Kirby Wilson's Maulers and go 1-9 or whatever, I think it was, to, it's not an unreasonable, just to put it in perspective. If I'm in either league, if I have 2 wins in the XFL, that balances out versus the no wins on that.
Yeah. And there's also things like, 5 weeks of training camp pay. There's also full coverage for you and your family, medical insurance. That's important. There's also full, not just housing, but like meals provided. You don't have to worry about that coming out of pocket for certain things, or amenities. Oh my, can I have Wi-Fi in my hotel or not? That's all covered. So those are great things to have. And those are added things as well. Whatever it is, $3,000 in XFL training camp. And then of course the salary and the bonuses and everything else that's entailed there. So it's good that the USFL setup is much better in year 2. And it's great that the union was able to make that work.
We'll move off here in a minute. Are you surprised that already with USFL here, because on paper, it is a great stat to have. I don't care how they did it with win bonuses or ever. To be able to say USFL increased salary 19% year over year, right? However they did it, whatever math numbers they did. You have Dave Naylor tweeting about it. We had Chris Jones on, I think, Morley Scott's show out of Edmonton, talking like, yeah, we're already having trouble getting players and personnel, like getting the attention of these CFL people. I don't care if it's USFL or XFL. Like, what do you think that means now with this CBA and the leagues kind of, combating for players and all that?
Perception is reality, and reality in this case, there is some more reality than perception in this case. The USFL salaries have gone up. And that they needed to do that, not just in the landscape of they're competing with the XFL, which, the XFL could wave the flag for a long time. Hey, we're paying other players more. So now the USFL can point to CFL players and say, see, we're in year 2. Our players are getting more. We have a union. And, and you can do that, to look, I wrote about this before. I know for a fact, and I have a list. There's over 316 players, USFL players, that have reached out through intermediaries to see if there are any spots available for them in the XFL. That's due diligence. That doesn't mean that a player wants to go or will go. That is to check and see if there is an opening for them. So I know all the names of all the players. And, So that's what you're supposed to do. As an agent, as a player, you're supposed to look into all your opportunities. If I go to Arlington, will I start at middle linebacker? If I go to San Antonio, will there be a spot open for me? If there isn't, I'm staying right where I am. So a lot of these players have to be happy. The USFL players have to be happy that there's, things are improving for year two, and that their faith in the league is being rewarded. And it's sending a message to future players. Hey, come to us. Look at our growth. It's a sign of progress. No matter how you paint it, 19%, whatever the case, it's a sign of progress. And perception is reality. So you have the CFL people out there that are noticing that. And then, of course, the XFL notices that. And then so all the players that are out there, this is great for the players. This gives them leverage, opportunities. They can weigh their options. You wouldn't be smart if you're a USFL player if you didn't weigh your options. My contract's running out 12/31. Let me see if I have a spot in another league. So agents are doing that too. So we're seeing some players that are choosing the USFL over the XFL because their depth chart looks more advantageous to me. And we're seeing some players that are choosing the XFL or the USFL because of various reasons. Maybe they like the coaches that they work with in the USFL that have now gone over to the XFL. Maybe the timeline works for them. They like the timeline better. So maybe they want to be in Texas. So this, that, and the other. So there are a lot of things that these players have to weigh on both sides before they make a decision. And so it's great that it's worked out this way for players who normally in this situation are like field hands who have no leverage whatsoever and just have to take whatever's shoveled in front of them and be accepting of it. So that's changing. Good.
So, yeah, and just to put a pin in this, so 300 USFL players, variety of factors. Was it monetarily, because obviously they knew these negotiations were going on. Was it living in Arlington and we're flying, we're going to be in the, what did you get a sense of what the majority of the players wanting to reach out? Was it just checking to see, do I have other interested parties? What was the main factor of people reaching out?
Just due diligence, really. You're trying to see if a situation's better for you on the other side of the fence. Trying to, some players like the timeline better and they have interest. Look, even if you have 100 USFL players right now, let's just say, for example, let's just give it 100, right? Out of the 316, right? Let's just say 100 players want to jump ship to the XFL. Even if it's got to be a two-way street. You've got to have an opportunity on the other side. If I'm working for the USFL, I would have done the same thing. If I was an agent, I would reach out and see. My contract expires at the beginning of the year. Let me see what it's like on their side. So there's a lot of different things you weigh. Pay, time of the year you play. Some people want to be in Birmingham during the season. Some don't. Some people would prefer to be in a different state, different location. Some people, there are a lot of great assistant coaches that left the USFL for the XFL, the Chris Dishmans, the Jonathan Himbaughs, the Tim Lewises. List goes on and on. There's some players who played for them that want to rejoin their coaches. Now, we might see that. We've seen a little bit of that already. We might see that after 12/31 in terms of players reuniting with their former coaches. No surprise with the Arlington Renegades that Jonathan Himbaugh, already has one of his all-star offensive linemen, first-team all-star offensive lineman with him in Arlington. He also has a first-team all-star offensive lineman in the USFL, Garrett McGinn, from the New Jersey Generals, who joined him as well. But, so there's some of that. There's a lot of networking, recruiting, connections, back and forth. Coaches also reach out to the other side. And I think that's what agents are supposed to do. You're supposed to sit there we just saw recently Akil Glass, who chose to join the USFL, talented player, chose to join the USFL with the New Orleans Breakers. That's when you look at it, honestly, that's a smart move on his part. Because if you join Las Vegas, and we're presuming now, we'll see after the new year, we're presuming Brian Scott and Luis Perez is there, along with Jalen McClendon. That's a tough nut to crack. Regardless of Akil Glass's background, whether or not he has a connection to the offensive coordinator or not, it's going to be hard. You have to figure XFL teams are going to dress only 2 quarterbacks. They might carry 3, maybe 1 on the inactive list. That'd be the smart play. But if you look at the San Antonio situation, you see that the Brahmas have 4 quarterbacks currently on their roster. And then you look over the other aisle and you see, well, the Stars only have 1 quarterback and the Breakers only have 1. That's a better chance because these guys want to play. It's no different than the college players that are in a transfer portal. They're looking for opportunities to start and play. They'll leave Georgia if they're the 7th or 8th wide receiver to go play at a smaller school if they're guaranteed that they're going to get playing opportunity. They might leave the SEC to do that. So that's what's happened in this situation, and that's where it's due diligence. It's exactly what agents are supposed to do. And what was the lure of the XFL? The lure of the XFL is, besides playing in the actual markets, the tax breaks that you can get, the 3 Texas teams and all that, is also the timeline, because a lot of players, rightly or wrongly, a lot of agents feel that the timeline is more conducive to go to the NFL from the XFL, because you get an earlier jump of joining NFL teams, learning the playbooks and all that. Look, we saw Kyle Sloter and Luis Perez, who ironically are in the XFL now. They did a very good job in the USFL. They both got NFL opportunities, but they didn't last for longer than a month because they were so late to it. It has nothing to do with their talents. They got in so late into the door that they're competing with other guys that are already there. So you weren't in the meetings during the spring and the early summer and all the installs and all that. So you're against the 8 ball. That's why you got to give credit to all the USFL players that have gotten into the NFL. We knew Cravante Turpin was going to be a star. I mean, everybody knew that. Even Dallas knew that. They gave him a 3-year deal. So I'm so happy to see him make the NFC Pro Bowl. So, and it wasn't a talent issue with Turpin. He had off-field issues that led him to not being an NFL player with domestic violence and all that. So that it took a while to get beyond all that. And so I'm happy for him. But there's a lot of USFL players that are on practice squads. There's 21 in total. I wrote an article about that at USFLnewshub.com. So there is still an avenue in the NFL, but there is a belief that you can better your chances if you get into an NFL camp 3 or 4 months prior to when USFL season ends. So that's one of the selling points.
Well, I think just worth noting too, and this might be something, because again, we're kind of living through this in real time of like, how are these leagues? With the XFL being the front loaded, right? They're playing in February. You might see, like you said, Akil Glass, all that, guys opting to sign to the USFL, looking and seeing like, there's just not enough room for me here, right? Versus, the USFL has that luxury of, hey, we're playing second, we're kind of able, you don't want to say the leftovers, but you can get some of those, but then also appeal to others and say, hey, like you said, you got 4 other quarterbacks, 3 other quarterbacks you're competing. We can give you a starting position here, because we're kind of forecasting out. It's just, it'll be interesting to see how the talent kind of lines up for that, of where XFL is first, USFL, and then obviously with the NFL in there. God forbid, fan control football here in May. I don't know what they're going to do, but it'll just be curious to see the pecking order of like people, you can realize very quickly if the XFL has room for you or not.
Sure. If I'm a running back too, this is what agents do. They do this in the NFL. They go through every team's depth chart. And then this is kind of the ugly side of sports, but you have to get into it. You look for teams that have injuries. And then you go, if you see 2 tight ends go down and you've got a client who's a tight end, you go, oh, Eagles need a tight end. Dallas Goedert is injured. Or Tyree Jackson, former XFL player, is injured. Let's set up a workout. Right? So that happens. If I'm a running back, I cover the DC Defenders at XFLnewshub.com. I just did 2 supplemental draft kind of preview articles, went over their roster. If I was a running back right now and I look at their depth chart, I think, wow, they got Puka Williams, they got Raquel Armstead, who was just in an NFL camp. They got Abram Smith, who was the 5th leading rusher in the nation last year. He was getting a lot of workouts. I don't know if he'll end up on the Defenders or not with how many NFL teams are interested in him. But be that as it may, if I look at that, Artavis Pierce, who was with the Bears this summer too, another talented running back. He couldn't make that backfield because they got Khalil Herbert, Montgomery, et cetera, one of the more talented backfields in the NFL. So if you're looking at the Defenders backfield and you're a running back and you go, and then you look over at another team in the USFL and go, you know what, that depth chart looks like, I'm Maulers, I got a shot to start. Whereas if I join DC, I might not even make the roster. We're going to be running back 5. So you have to weigh that if you're an agent, and that's what agents do for their players. You study each team's depth chart and you look at where's the best spot for me to fit. We're seeing that with Nathan Rourke, who's from the CFL, who's working out for a bunch of NFL teams right now. He and his agent have to sit there, and what they have to do is they have to look at the number 2 and number 3 and number 4 quarterbacks in some cases on each individual NFL roster and say, hey, Nathan, I think you got a shot against Nick Mullen, so I think you'll do better competing against him. These are the conversations that go on behind the scenes. And they look at the coaching staffs, who's going to get fired, who's not. So there's a lot of things that are tying in. What system am I going to play in? So if you're Rico Gafford, who the San Antonio Brahmas drafted in their last draft pick in the open phase, where XFL teams were passing on players in that round, he was like the last choice the Brahmas had. if you're Rico Gafford and you're looking at the Brahmas and at the defensive back or wide receiver position, and you see you're 7th or 8th already, and they're going to add more players, and then you look over at the USFL and go, wait a minute, the Stallions lost some players, I can go play for them, or it's a better opportunity for you. So that's what these players are supposed to do, is try to find the best opportunity that fits for them, because they want to get to the NFL, but the best way to get to the NFL is to actually get playing time. So that's how you get game film.
You better be careful here. I saw you on you got all your Defenders articles, XFL News Hub, because I know that was the complaint with you and the Argos with CFL News Hub. It's like, what is this, Argos News Hub? Like, you may have, it's kind of become a Defenders News Hub over there. I just want to say, I want to keep that in mind. But it's good. It's good for you.
We'll see how it goes. As we get closer, I'm hoping, there's more, you'll see articles on a lot of the teams, but read by now how crazy I am. In the last 5 days, I've written 8 separate articles, 3 Argos articles, 3 USFL articles, 2 XFL articles. So I try and I cover the NFL too, and the Jets, who are going to lose to the Jaguars. But, I hope not, but I think that's where it's headed. But yeah, me, Reed. I cover all these leagues, so I'll be all in on the Defenders. I went crazy on that, football nerded on that entire roster, even listed, it's a pipe dream, but I listed some guys like John Ross and other guys I would like to see in the XFL as possibilities through the supplemental draft. I threw in some names that I have heard that have been in negotiations and in the pool. It's crazy right now. We can get into some of that, but it's crazy right now. It's so volatile, the whole situation right now. Like, for example, the Sea Dragons appears to have lost Steven Montez to the Seattle Sea Dragons. But I did speak to someone to
the Lions.
Right. Right. Originally, Seattle Sea Dragons. He went to the Detroit Lions. Yes. The Detroit Lions, a team that Steven Montez was with previously. He's also been with the Washington football team, now known as the Commanders. But I spoke with someone close to the Sea Dragons who, and in the XFL office, who told me today that Montez has reached out to the league to tell him that he's still interested in coming back if the opportunity arises. Now, whether or not he decides to sign a futures deal with the Lions and remain there, that remains to be seen. It's an unpredictable situation. But is it possible that he could circle back? As far as I talked to someone close to the Sea Dragons, and they told me that they would even hold a spot for him in camp if necessary. But they could, they might have to pivot and move on, and I would likely add a third quarterback now just in case Montez doesn't come back. They have Ben DiNucci and all that there. So it's a very volatile situation right now as we go into, a period where NFL seasons start to end, practice squads contracts expire, and then futures contracts are given out. And then all the craziness with whatever USFL players join. I don't figure it's going to be that many USFL players that jump ship, a select few. The reason why I say that is there's only so many spots that are available anyway to begin with. So there's only 70 spots. They're not all going to go to, players on the other side of the fence that are interested. It has to be a two-way street. So so that's just kind of the story there. But there's a lot of volatility. Every day now we wait and see like which XFL player is going to be picked up by an NFL team, an XFL drafted player, that is, because in some ways that's good, and in some ways that's bad. The good thing about it is that it shows the quality of the draft picks that were selected by the XFL's personnel departments for each individual team, when you've got whatever it is now, 8 or 9 guys that have been signed by NFL teams and over 24 players that have been worked out by NFL teams since the XFL draft happened in mid-November. So fascinating times, a lot of excitement during all this roster turnover craziness.
Well, as Seattle's premier Sea Dragons fan, I will say we are a pro Ben DiNucci podcast. Ben's been on a friend of the show now. So I just, Steven can go do whatever he wants, go play with the Lions, and they're probably going to knock the Commanders out of the NFC playoffs. That's fine. But let's hit real quick Alumni Academy, because I want to talk Vegas before we go. I don't think we're going to get to everything else. Obviously, we know, you were on Mark's show, Andy was on, deep dive, NFL Alumni Academy, all that. Like, any update of that? Any news that we have? Like, have we just moved on from this entirely?
No, I don't think they've moved on. I think they're still talking. I think they're still working. They're still planning to work together. They're still trying to find a resolution there between both sides moving forward. The reality is that the numbers are not matching up. And they're not. You can't force that. You can't all of a sudden force every single player into the league. So the XFL is not expanding beyond 8 teams. The XFL office did not force selections upon their teams. Now, could they have made it mandatory? You have no choice but to, in your draft, select this amount of guys from the academy? Perhaps. But I think they didn't want to force the issue. They're not forcing players. The XFL football ops led by Mark Ross, everybody else, these teams are being given the freedom to make their own decisions on who they want. So some players from the academy were drafted, some weren't. You got A.J. McCarron was chosen by the Battlehawks. That's somebody that they wanted on their roster. Bruce Gatkowski, Anthony Beck, that bowler, that personnel department, that's who they wanted on their team. So that's a good thing. But, they're going to have to work it out. I don't think you hope that they find a happy medium on both sides where everybody wins. And so it's a positive that so many players are going to have opportunities to play in the XFL from the academy. Maybe it's not the number they hoped for initially, but it's still positive, whether it be 30, 40, 50, 60, however many players end up playing pro football this spring. It's a good thing for them. Maybe not. It's not a happy thing for everybody.
I just don't, and I'm sure we have had and you have had, but I remember talking with Max about this back, months ago, and we're like, there's no way they're ever going to have this many spots. I just can't for the life of me figure out how they didn't see this issue coming from, and I'm not a smart person, but I kind of was like, if they got 400 people, whatever, this never going to work out.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that the numbers for a long time now, we foresaw this coming. Anybody who looked at the numbers. So, I think they underestimated the amount of interest. That's kind of like my take on it. I think they wanted to ensure a pipeline. 100%, they wanted to ensure a pipeline with a competing league on the landscape. They wanted to ensure a quality pipeline, and it is a quality pipeline through the academy. A lot of those players are guys from NFL camps, that recent NFL camps, all that. So that's good, but I think they overdid it in trying to ensure that they had a guaranteed pipeline into the league, and the aesthetic of it with, from an image standpoint of having, even on paper, the NFL helping bring players to the XFL. People forget the Alumni Academy is really like a startup operation themselves. They're trying to build up. They want to get to the point where they have agents and players who consider them the premier and first destination for getting into pro leagues. So baby steps, and maybe they haven't taken the leaps that they wanted in this situation. But I think the XFL didn't calculate it correctly. And you can't really excuse it or make an excuse for it. They didn't read the tea leaves correctly on how many people actually want to be in their league.
Okay, so Vegas, I think we'll stop down. I probably have one other thing here before we go. I had a couple questions here about the rule book, but I think I have a good qualified XFL spokesperson that will be coming on next week. We can talk about some of that stuff. The countdown to nuclear warfare clock, right, ends at midnight, right? And it's every. How close to midnight are we for nuclear disaster for the Vegas situation?
I would argue it's a disaster already, because honestly, this situation should have been cleared up much sooner. It's a red flag. It's not a good look on the league. Look. There are a lot of anxious fans out there that were going overboard in their lack of patience for team names and uniforms and all that. We knew all that stuff was coming. We knew the players were not going to get on the field naked. We knew the teams were going to have team names. We knew all that was coming. It maybe didn't come as soon as some people wanted, but we knew eventually that was coming. I think eventually they're going to announce the Vegas situation, but this is not a good thing for it to be a little bit later than you expect. And it's not a good look on the league overall, because, look, if you and I, Reed, were starting a league, and we started suggesting cities, the first thing I would ask you, before we get into all the cool and fun stuff like uniforms, who your coach is going to be, the players, all that, the first thing I would say, okay, Reed, you want a team in San Diego, where are they going to play? And then you'd be like, I know where they would play. So you would figure that's just being fans talking through, that's the first question. If you're in any league and you pick a city, Unless you're, and here's the thing with the XFL, and I reported this, and they shifted away from it. Initially, they were going to do a hub in Texas with all 8 teams and not be in their individual cities. And then they made what I think is the wise decision, however late it may have been, to let's put these teams in their markets. Let's figure out a happy medium, a way to do this where we can still have a hub during the season, but still bring them out to their market. So we're not fully fledged in these markets practicing there, but it's a start, right? So cool. And thank goodness cooler heads prevailed on that one. But, because that would have been a disaster if they just did the hub thing. I mean, come on. So it's just
who plays all their games at this point? No, I'm kidding.
I hear you. So, but anyhow, it would have been, especially for them, because if you're trying to come to the marketplace and present a different kind of league, you want to, plus you want to capture, this isn't a new league. You want to capture what XFL in 2020 had, where they averaged nearly 20,000 fans per game. Now, some people would mock that, but the CFL struggles to do that, and they've been around forever and a day. And so, it's not easy with a brand new league when you got new players, new teams, new identities to draw up people to put money down and come see your game. So the XFL in 2020, the advantage they had is they had good crowds and they had engaged crowds, and that was one of the reasons the league was lit. Besides the quality of the play on the field, the innovations. So when you look at it with the XFL as far as Las Vegas goes, if you choose a market, you have to have a fully fledged plan of where they're going to play. You can't be a month out from the season, almost a month out from the season started, and not have the situation, the stadium situation settled. So that's not a good look on them. Have there been hurdles in that market? Sure. You could, have there been some opposition? At least from what I'm hearing, it sounds like there may very well be. Getting a deal with Allegiant Stadium is difficult. Not only are you going into the Raiders territory, but you're going to have to pay through the nose. You can't get a deal that's favorable to you if you're a new league. So to pay rent in that situation. And then, the Allegiant Stadium has a lot of partnerships. The Raiders managed Allegiant Stadium, Mark Davis, a lot of partnerships throughout the Vegas area. There hasn't been really a welcome wagon for the Vipers to come in and hey, here, come play in our stadium. We would love to have you. You would figure they would, because if the Vipers played in Las Vegas ballpark, they have a very nice minor league team there. The Aviators, obviously, and they average 6,000 fans per game. I would guarantee the Vipers would dwarf that. They would top that easily. So as far as attendance, you would figure a location like that would want to have them. The XFL chose Vegas. Jerry Cardinal, it was his personal choice. They saw the business opportunities in that market, the potential windfall that could come of being in Vegas. I get it. But unless you had the stadium, because with the other cities, we knew St. Louis would probably end up back in the Dome. We knew DC would end up back in Audi Field. There are a lot of hurdles in getting those deals done too, but at least there was some form of relationship there. Some evidence. Seattle, Lumen Field with the Dragons, Sea Dragons there. They had good attendance, and that venue liked having the Dragons and the XFL there. So, and the market liked it, and they did well. So we knew that those stadiums would be back on board. The XFL took a risk with Las Vegas because they dove into a market. They rolled the dice, hoping to roll snake eyes, and have the Vipers, fittingly enough, have the red carpet rolled out for them and have a stadium ready to go. And they don't have one, and it's holding up the entire league. You have a lot of understaffed teams right now. A lot of workers in the XFL that are working extremely hard. Multitasking, doing whatever it takes to get ready for the season. And Vegas not having a stadium is holding up the entire league because you can't push forward with schedules and TV schedules and sell tickets and all that because Arlington's ready to go. Houston, the Roughnecks are ready to go. All these other teams are ready to go. So we're going to get an announcement one way or the other. We're going to find out where Vegas, whether they're playing at a high school stadium like Bishop Gorman or what have you. We'll see. But or whether they just take up shop in Texas for 1 year and take the L and say next year we'll play in Vegas. But if you're going to do that, that's a fail. You failed because you could have chosen other markets you could have played in that would have gladly welcomed the league with open arms. And it's a shame because I love that coaching staff. I love the players they got on that roster. I love the uniforms. I love the brand. I think the Vipers are better now than they ever were. You can't say that for all the brands that are returning from XFL 2020. I think they look cool. So anyhow, but it's no matter how you slice it, how you try to spin it, eventually they'll announce it and they'll move forward. But to this point, they screwed up, because You can't go into a market if you don't have it set up, if you don't know where you're going to play. So that's how it is.
My concern is we do announce it, and it still is a disappointment, right? At this point, because Bishop Gorman looked really good on that ESPNU over the weekend or whatever.
Yeah,
But
just like the football. I'm sorry, Reed. I'm sorry to interrupt you. As long as they have a place to play, that's fine. The football side, Rod Woodson, we heard his comments. He'll play anywhere. I think the football will be good. So, you deal with how you deal with it. But I think at this late stage, it's bad because you're going into a market that Vegas is not really a market that's like, salivating for this.
Yeah.
And so I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. So, and so you're late to the game as it is. So you're giving yourself a very difficult runway to try to sell tickets and draw in fans and draw interest in the market. You were going to have a hard time as it is, a challenge as it is. So, I think, like, to me, Las Vegas has been the whole situation, the whole stadium situation has been an L for the XFL. They've handled it poorly. So there's no dancing around it. When they announce a stadium, you get over it. You'll be just happy they have a place to play. I'll look forward to the games. I'm looking forward to watching Rod Woodson's team. So they're going to have some really cool players there, Perez, everybody else. So, but the football side is not the issue. It's really the business side. It's the business side.
Why is current XFL management okay with Choctaw, right? Like Globe Life Park, we've retrofitted all this and, made that work and it's kind of a thing. Is it just because that's grandfathered in and that's okay? Because they seem very averse. Like, we've heard like they don't want to play at the Vegas ballpark or the Vegas ballpark doesn't want them and they don't want to play Cashman. They don't want to play Bishop Gorman. They only want to play like, but you do that in Arlington, right? You play in a baseball stadium. Like, is it just because that was grandfathered in? Like that's acceptable?
I suppose, they do have I don't know too much about Choctaw, but I'll say this. It's more of a state of the art complex, and as far as their facilities than some of these other, high school places or names that we're mentioning here. No disrespect, obviously Texas Rangers management, that's where the Rangers used to play. So they made it work. It looked good on TV, and they have state of the art facilities. That is an awesome area to want to be in and do business and all that. So they can make it work. Listen, if they end up at Gorman or Cashman or wherever it may be, the games the ESPN and the XFL will do everything it takes to make the games look respectable on television. Some people were very much against them playing at Allegiant. A lot of fans out there, a lot of critics out there felt that that's too big of a stadium. As beautiful as it is, it's too big of a stadium. So perhaps from a visual standpoint, from a TV standpoint, perhaps it's better if the Vipers play at a smaller venue. They won't have trouble selling it out as long as they find a place to play. I just have to question choosing the market that they chose when they didn't have anything lined up. So, it's proof's in the pudding. So it's not a deterrent to not want to watch the league if only 7 of the 8 teams are playing in their home cities and 1 isn't. But ideally, if you're going to sell tickets in that market, and if you're going to try to win over that market, you would have gotten this done a hell of a lot sooner.
A couple more questions on Vegas. We're still talking. They're ramping up. We know we're ramping up all the social media. Now everyone's got to pack up. We got to get to Texas. We're doing all this stuff. Like, why did we have directors of team operation announce in August and we're still hiring social media people in December? Like, I've never understood the order of events of some of the hires for this. We can get social media people later, but yeah, we really need the people in charge of team travel announced and booked in August.
I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, and I always get a lot of heat for a lot of the stuff that I say. It almost appears, Reed, as if the people who are running the XFL have never operated a sports league before. So that's heavy to say that, but it's the truth. Redbird Capital Partners, tremendous success. They have business dealings and sports dealings. They're worth billions of dollars. They've had relationships with powerhouses. We know about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We know about Danny Garcia. Nothing but respect for them in the business world, the entertainment world, all that. But they never running a pro football league is hard. It is very difficult. That's why the USFL, rightly or wrongly, took the route of let's start small first because it's much easier. And when you're trying to be a fully fledged league with 8 teams in their cities and do all this and hire everybody you can possibly hire, they're a little bit, they've had a lot of hiccups along the way. It's not easy putting together a new league. It's not easy putting together a new company or a new business. And football leagues are very difficult. It's very challenging. So, and you often have people that are overworked and teams that are understaffed, and you're getting that with the XFL at the moment. So I'm not surprised to see these issues with startup leagues, but the XFL before didn't have these problems.
I've always said it's just hubris from both sides. It's USFL has had their own. It's just weird hubris with both of these where I think I said it I can't remember, a couple weeks ago. I just feel like neither of these leadership groups really understand their core demo of who they're trying to attract. And this is alternative spring football. This is not, this is not number 5 sports in America right now. This is really niche. I don't know. I look at what's happened with Black Adam and DC, and I went down a deep dive the other day of The Rock and Black Adam and Superman and his demands and what went into all of that. And I understand that The Rock is not entirely involved in this, but it's that kind of thinking where it's odd to me where The Rock is coming in and saying I need to be a superhero that is as powerful or more powerful than Superman, or I'm not going to be in this movie. It's weird stuff like that I think has permeated. We can't play at a baseball park in Vegas, but we can play at one in Texas, but that's okay. I don't know. There's just, I've always sensed weird hubris here. And I think it's showing right now. Like you said, it's a little bit of egg on the face. It's not a wonderful situation.
I think right now that there's a lot of angst out there, and there's a lot of criticism, whether some of it valid, some of it sometimes a little overhyped. But I think that you start to look at all different types of angles. I can see maybe why you would look into. I think the DC stuff has has no bearing whatsoever on the XFL. Perhaps you can look at it it's
just a mindset. It's just a mindset.
I hear what you're saying. I think there are two sides to this, right? There are a lot of sides to it, but really, when you section it off, there's the football side and the business side, right? So from a football perspective, I have no doubt that they're going to put out great football, right? So I have no doubt whatsoever, right? They're going to have the great rules that everybody's using from 2020. They're going to have all those innovations. You have all these players. You just look at the rosters, how many good players are on there and how many more players are going to join. You look at the coaching staffs are terrific. The personnel departments are terrific. So I have no doubt the football is going to be good. The business side, as far as league building goes, it hasn't been perfect. There have been a lot of hiccups along the way. There's a lot of stuff that warrants criticism. So they'll get to the field. They'll get the games out. They have a tremendous partner in Disney. The presentation is going to be tremendous. So I have no doubt it's going to be world-class, the product on the field. The issue is, not being able to finalize all these different business aspects, not being able to put everything in place when you're supposed to. Love him or hate him, Vince McMahon did a tremendous job with XFL 2020. He hired the right people, and he was the engine. He had a mission statement. He was the engine, and he knew how to get it off the ground. Obviously, it was every single cent that was coming out of his own pocket. A complete madman doing that. But you look at the XFL in 2020, it's hard. To do a startup league, it's difficult. You have to expect hiccups and issues. There are always going to be issues. No doubt about it. Every single league that's ever been created has had issues in their early startup phase. There's just no way around it. Vegas is an L for the XFL because they should have had the stadium done a long time ago. And they've gotten to the point where they have to press the button and decide one way or the other. You keep hearing from people that it's done, it's coming soon. I keep hearing that from people in the XFL, that it's coming this Monday, all that. I'll believe it when I see it.
It's coming this Monday, as in 2 days from now?
Yeah, well, I heard this Monday that just passed, and now I'm hearing the Monday that's coming up. So I don't report this stuff because you don't see me going out there writing an article that it's coming Monday, because I'll believe it when I see it. So it's reached that point. They got no choice, Reed, though. They're going to have to decide one way or the other, whether or not they play in a baseball stadium, a high school stadium, whatever it is, or play in Texas. They have plenty of facilities to play with there. The XFL teams are going to be in camp in a few weeks at different high school facilities, training together, working out together. Teams are going to be paired up together. So they got plenty of options in Texas if they want to go that route with the Austin Vipers. But they have to figure this whole situation out. They have to announce it one way or the other. Where are the Vipers playing? Here's their schedule. Here's the travel itinerary for all these teams and the fans who want to travel to games. So and because you're holding back the other teams from being successful. You know St. Louis is going to sell tickets. You know DC is going to do well. These other teams want to get a jump on things. They want to be able to start selling tickets. And, that's the thing with the uniforms too. The uniforms are kind of late as well because you want to put them out as early as possible so you can hit Black Friday, so you can hit the Christmas season. You want to make money, right? This is what it is about. So my criticism is more about the business end, how they've handled that. And then it is the football. The football stuff I'm loving. I even like the uniforms, for all the good and the bad. There's a lot of incomplete passes in there, but there's some scores there too. So right now it's the business side that's really troubled me. Them finalizing things.
Well, and I've said that in here before, and I've gotten probably not as much feedback as you have about things being said or whatever, but my concern has never been the football. I think it's going to be the best football that's been played in the last 20 years in the spring of, we have scouted the globe for all this stuff, but, I don't know if anyone's going to see it, right? When just to finish and then we'll have one more question on this because I think it's pertinent. When I talk, because you're like, well, the DC and all that stuff, I understand that. When I was in Arlington, you're familiar with BDE, right? Like
Sure.
There was a BDE in that room in Arlington of we're doing because I asked, why is this going to be better than the USFL? Well, we're playing in the stadiums. Why wouldn't it be? We're doing this. We found the best. This is just not indicative of that, right? That's why I say when I'm talking about hubris and mindset and stuff, there's this BDE that, you've been successful at a lot of other things, but like you said, you might not know this or might not know whatever. Why hasn't the XFL just said Vegas TBD, let's release the other 7 things and get going on it? I don't get why we can't just say you're going to know where 7 of the 18, hey, they're playing in Seattle, they're playing in whatever, Vegas TBD, but at least you can get the schedules out for the other 7.
I'm crazy. Before the 2020 season, the reason why I'm bringing this up, I actually tried to simulate how I would have scheduled the entire XFL season when I was 10 weeks. It is hard, Reed. If you actually sit down and do this, if you eliminate one team and you go, okay, well, wait a minute, DC, are they going to Vegas in week 4? But wait, okay, so where's Vegas going in week 5? And then who's traveling to them? If you eliminate one team from the equation and only schedule 7 teams.
But you schedule Vegas and you just say it's going to be somewhere in the greater Las Vegas area, right?
Right, but they don't know if they're going to be in Vegas. because they could eventually be in Texas too. And what Texas stadium are they going to be playing in? That's a little bit easier for them in terms of travel, right? I would assume that they're going to be in Vegas eventually, but I think we're going to get the Vegas stadium. That's my feeling on it, but it's less than ideal when we're getting it. So and you're not doing yourself any favor in terms of selling tickets. In that specific market. I didn't think it was a great market to choose to begin with. So I didn't think they have an appetite for football, even though, there's an appetite there for the Raiders. They're going to have the Super Bowl there. It's a great city. I know that, the gambling, all that. But the interactions I've had with Vegas media members and people there, it doesn't seem like they barely know the Vipers exist. So we'll see how that goes. But I think it's a little bit hard. I like your idea, Reed, but I think they have egg on their face already, but they would rather just have the Vegas location settled, whatever it's going to be, and then release the schedule. So you can see, DC will be going to Vegas on March 8th or whatever. And then, you can do the whole schedule hype videos and all that, attach that. So they want to get that settled so they can push forward.
If you had to put $100 on if we know by the end of this calendar year.
I'm going to say we're not going to get it till. I'm going to say we're not going to get it till January. I'd say we're not going to get it till probably the first week of January. I want to be wrong on that, but just because I think you're doing yourself a disservice as a league, in that specific market. So I want to say first week of January. I'll be happy if I'm wrong about that.
Well, I just, I got to know. I'm getting to the point where I'm getting, and even if I didn't do this show and want to do live shows and stuff, like I'm getting inquired for March weddings and, hey, are you available? What's going on? I'm like, well, I don't know if it's a Saturday home game or a Sunday or if we're going to be here.
There are a lot of fans that want to There's a lot of fans that want to travel. A lot of fans in St. Louis that want to travel to Vegas. They're going to make it a trip. Like, oh, well, I want to go see the Battlehawks play the Vipers. And this is perfect. I get to go to Vegas. I get to do all that. So there's a lot of fans out there from different markets that want to go. I want to be able to go out to Vegas too. That would be an awesome trip. So it would be nice to know when I could go.
Yeah.
So that's just the way it is. But I don't think we're going to get it till we get past the Christmas season and into the new year. I'm hoping that I'm wrong about that.
I don't know if he wants me to talk about him on the show anymore, but I was just tagged in on Twitter with, hey, you can get a flight from Seattle to Vegas for, I think, $19 or whatever right now for a Christmas special. I said, we're trying to figure out,
awesome.
like, hey, it would be nice if we knew when the Vegas games were. I said, man, I would start looking at flights to Arlington. Screw Vegas. We got to figure out. Last question today. I appreciate your time. A lot of other stuff I'm deleting off here. Like, in terms of XFL looking for more funding, looking for more equity stake, we want minority owners, USFL wanting any of that stuff, FedEx, like, they're not selling it to the Memphis, right? We're not selling it to the FedEx guy, but he's encouraging us to come here. Like, any updates on ownership for either the XFL or the USFL trying to franchise out these teams?
I think both sides are looking for funding. I think that's Redbird Capital's wheelhouse, is seeking investors, finding people, raising capital. That's Redbird Capital, right? So that's what they do. So yeah, that's a never-ending thing for them. And then the USFL, the Fox has been trying to do that. They both have prestigious partners who are helping them along with that. So there's an interest on both sides to continue to do that. You'd love to be able to get to the point where you don't need seed money. Because right now, Fox is covering all the costs of the USFL. Redbird is covering all the costs. They have money earmarked to cover all the expenses. But, over time, there was hope with the USFL that they'd be able to sell off the franchise to individual owners. But if you get to the point where you can self-sustain it and it can grow and you can create revenue streams, then and you can operate and not need anyone else to join in. Maybe you want the entire pie for yourself. That would be tremendous if they could do that. But that's the initial thought process with this. It's like with anything. If I have a company that's, and I'm putting $100,000 into it, I'm trying to raise capital and have it grow. I hate to go all Shark Tank on this, but you if you can get some investors to come in, put in $6 million, and then you can really, because that's the whole point of getting raising capital is for growth. And so maybe the USFL and the XFL can have growth without that money, but that's Redbird's wheelhouse. And these two companies have hired prestigious partners to help them in that. And the USFL had a year where it was kind of an infomercial to sell their product to individual cities and owners and all that. And the product was good, but they really didn't get that, not yet anyway. They haven't gotten that kind of seed money from investors, where Redbird is just kind of getting started. They haven't shown their product yet. So we'll see how it goes, but I think that's more down the line stuff.
All right, Mike, get ready. You got a big AFC battle tonight here. I saw today they're like, as long as Zach Wilson just doesn't kill the Jets tonight, I think they'll be okay. But we'll see. Mike, anything else from you? I appreciate your time today.
No, thank you very much, Reed, for having me on. Thanks for being patient, working around schedules, all that. Happy holidays to you and yours, and to everyone out there. It's been a fun year, and we're headed toward an even more fun time in 2023.
This is what was.
There was a time we heard 2023 when the XFL had announced that they're not coming back in 2021, and then they're not coming back in 2022. And when I heard 2023, it's like, another 2 years. So I'm like, it was, and now we're fine, God willing, thank God, we're headed towards that. And then, so it's finally here, 2023, because it didn't sound great a couple of years ago here in that year specifically. So anyhow.
It felt like a really long time. It has felt like a really long time. This is episode 124. We've never had a game of XFL to talk about on this podcast. So
crazy.
Anyway, Mike, have a good Christmas. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Well, I texted Andy Murray this week. I said, I need the professor's expertise. And here he is. Andy Murray, how are you doing, sir?
Like I said, always ready at a moment's notice, Reed. But I'm good. How are you?
This is good. A lot of work went in this week. A lot of work. Andy coming on. Mike, Max has put in a lot of work behind the scenes. We had Darren come on, CFL agent, Kenneth and Ryan, everything else. Wanting to get my head around these figures, XFL versus USFL here. You'll see we have a spreadsheet. You can follow along. But I think it's important because, the USFL CBA, they're tentatively agreed to. They're going to vote on here. Getting rid of win bonuses. We're doing other things. We're raising campaigns. So I thought it would be helpful, Max and I, just to kind of go through, get your thoughts on this. We have some notes and stuff as well. How does that sound?
Sounds beautiful. I love it.
So if you're looking here on this wonderful chart here, so you'll see, of course, I didn't even have it set up correctly to begin with. So you have XFL black here going in, USFL in blue, talking components, US dollars. We go through, camp and all this kind of stuff all the way down. And then we have a bunch of different scenarios. So first off, what did you make of the USFL CBA with them opting no win bonuses? We don't want playoff bonuses except the title game. We're taking less there, but we would rather have a higher base salary.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think raising that base, raising that floor was maybe the most important component of it as far as competing contracts across other spectrums, most notably with the XFL. I think in order to do that, and I'm glad that they were able to do that before the season came along because there were ongoing negotiations for months now, and the fact that they were able to kind of do that in such a timely manner was really important. I was honestly surprised that it got done in December. I thought it would be more towards closer to the beginning of next season, but they were able to hash the details out. But yeah, raising the floor, I think clearly was a big goal for them, and for them to be able to actually accomplish that as far as the base pay, I think that's important. And as we'll get into, it also really affects in terms of players who are active versus inactive. That's a really big part of it as well, which wasn't really part as much of the press release or some of the initial coverage, but that is something that is worth noting as well.
Go into that right now. Expand on that.
Well, it just seems, just based on the layout that we have as far as the numbers go, it appears to at least both of us that it looks like if you're an inactive player in the USFL versus an active player in the XFL, for instance, there seems to be at least a higher level or a higher floor of compensation for inactive players in the USFL if you are not playing. And so if you're not necessarily participating or being engaged in every week activity, then you are still getting at least some fair amount of compensation as it kind of lays out in the contract. But then conversely, versus the XFL, which is the more you play and the more you win, the more you're rewarded. So it's kind of like two dichotomies of would I rather live with the high floor or would I try to achieve the ceiling? That's kind of the two that, to me, at least from a compensation standpoint, seems to be the two differing philosophies here.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah. So if you look here, camp, first line here, number 2, XFL camp's going to be 5 weeks, paying $800 a week. I had confirmation from Ryan yesterday. USFL is going to be 4 weeks, 28, 30 days. You're going to get $700 a week. That's a $50 increase per last year. That also comes with a travel stipend for the USFL, to get you out there. Active for the XFL is $5,000 a week. It's $5,350 for the USFL. Like Andy said, that's if you're an active player on differing numbers of that. There are 45 active players per week for XFL rosters. In 2023, there's only going to be 40 on the USFL roster. There's 5 inactive spots on the XFL and then 10 on the USFL. So more spots, balancing out that way. USFL is increasing that to 42 spots in 2024 with the 8 inactive. It is a lower inactive pay. If you are inactive in the XFL, $1,500 a week. Substantially more, $2,500 a week if you're going to be in the USFL. Regular season wins in the XFL carry $1,000 a week bonus if you're playing. And that is, I believe, whether you are active or inactive. Yeah, active or inactive players are eligible for all win bonuses in the XFL, regardless of playoffs or not. And then in the USFL, not. so far, thoughts on that? Like you said, the discrepancies in the inactive pay higher in the USFL, but then obviously getting those potential win bonuses in the XFL, whether you're active or inactive.
Well, that's interesting to me, considering that the whole hullabaloo last year was about the lack of roster spots or the lack of depth on the roster spots for the USFL, at least at the beginning of the season. And then gradually they increased that in the middle of the season and were able to adjust a little bit for that. So it's interesting to me in that you're having essentially these certain number of allocated inactive spots, and you're compensating them more handsomely for just basically being available, which I think maybe is something that the USFL wanted to prepare for as far as like injuries. Maybe they did number researching last year and realized how much in terms of allocation of like how many players could come in versus injuries that could happen potentially on a football field, and what was going to happen in that regard, that they needed to be able to say, hey, even if you're not in there, you're at least going to be giving a certain fair salary if you are not going to be in the games, because we may or may not need you on the active roster at some point. And based on, again, maybe on their data metrics from last year, maybe they were able to see like, okay, this certain number of players may be able to get filtered through and be able to play at a certain point, but we need them to be like in the system, not just some guy that we sign off the street randomly. Like, I know, for example, they have that partnership with Hub, but I think this is like kind of like the next step up of like, okay, we already have this guy here before, and then once he goes up to the active roster and someone gets permanently injured, then we can bring someone else in. But I think it's just basically being able to like have, I guess, stock is supposed to the word I would use, just proper stock in case something happens.
Yeah, and I think to me, and again, you're with the 1,500, you're eligible for those win bonuses in the XFL, but that's a drastic step down to go from 5,000 to 1,500, depending where 2,500 a week. But you're getting the stipends and all that to be in Birmingham, Memphis, whatever. A little more appealing, right? Again, it feels to me, XFL, like we're really betting on ourselves here. Like if I'm going to be on the winning team, we're going to do all that. So the semifinal wins for the XFL, you get an $8,000 bonus on that. And then you'll obviously get your active pay or inactive pay that week. Title bonus is $11,500. Reduced the 10,000 down to 5,000 for the title win bonus for the USFL. So the max playoff bonus total for the XFL, 29,500. Max playoff bonus for the USFL would be 15,700.
Yeah, and actually, I'm glad you pointed that out, because the only thing that would really compensate an inactive player fully in terms of the XFL versus the USFL is if that player rode through an entire season and got through the championship game. Basically, if they were on a really good roster, then they'd probably match a regular season compensation model for the USFL. But yeah, I agree with your analogy there. It is very much like betting on yourself. It is not only just playing in the league and being a starter, maybe even playing well and being on a good team. It really is a bit more of a gamble. It's like, if you're going to do this, you better be sure that you know what your skill level is and what your role on the team is, if you're going to be even playing, if you're going to be on the active roster, if you think that the coaches are going to trust you, if you think they're going to put you in good positions, if you think that where you're going to go is going to be the best fit for you. If you really believe that, then yes, absolutely ride with that train. But if you're not so sure, maybe if you're a little more ambivalent, you think, well, I'm not sure if this team's even going to use me, or if I'm going to even be part of like everyday activity, or if I'm more realistic about not necessarily the skill set, but maybe your role on the team, then maybe it's better to just sort of be in the USFL for at least a while and maybe sort of find out and placate, see like, okay, what do I need to do? How can I be part of that? I mean, look, if you were a Birmingham Stallions player last year, obviously you won the whole thing. And if you were going to the XFL pay mall, like you're like, oh my God, this is great. But in the USFL's case here, it's just like, it's not so much of a humongous difference between like, okay, well, you're on a 2-8 team versus 9-1 or an 8-2 team, for instance. But in the XFL, that dichotomy maybe is a little bit more extreme in that case. Like, it's going to be very much your trust in yourself and your trust in the people around you.
And the title win for the USFL, that is, you're also eligible for that, whether you're inactive or active. We clarified that with Ryan. So getting that squared away. The interesting thing, and his interview is coming up later in the show, Darren Gill, he's a CFL agent. I asked him about this, and he said, I'm really against the win bonuses. I would, that to me feels much back like to the arena football days of, well, you can, if you play, maybe you might get $500. If you lose, maybe you get a bus ride home or whatever. Like, as someone looking out for players, you would like to see, that a higher, base floor on that. Do you think that the XFL too high of playoff bonuses here? Or would you rather see some of that money allocated back to raising that, maybe it's $5,200 a week, and then we're not worried about an $8,000 playoff bonus?
Yeah, maybe a slight adjustment there, because that is something that ultimately is trying to give a livelihood to these players. But again, the thing here is that maybe this is more of a bunch of players who think that they're going to have a shot in the NFL. Like, they really think, based on the calendar, or maybe even go play off in Canada for a little bit, possibly just based on how the calendar aligns. Because keep in mind, that's the other thing here too. This is all based on this is also based on calendar alignment. This is based on if these players think they're going to be able to hop over to another league or get another opportunity later on down the road. But yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. I think that could help a little bit, maybe, but I'm not sure if it drastically changes the equation. What really is going to change the equation down the road is if, say, the XFL gets through their season and they have they go through their compensation packages, and then maybe the PFPA or the professional, the UFPA. Sorry, the UFPA. Yes, just losing my.
I know it's very hard to keep. That's a hard one for me because it's like the United Football, and I'm like, okay, what is her Twitter handle? Yes, United Football Players Association.
Right, the UFPA is going to come in and maybe start their own term of negotiations with this league and say, okay, well, this is what we were able to bring to the USFL players. Now we want to start talking to one of our clients have been saying in the XFL, and sort of maybe now renegotiate that. So that's the other thing here. Like, USFL would not. I don't think the USFL would have done this last year, because they would have said, well, we just want to get us through a season first. Let's pump the brakes on this at the moment. But once maybe the XFL goes through a season, then maybe we start to see some of that money allocated the other way, perhaps.
Yeah. So just to run through some scenarios here, because again, it's like, what does this all mean? And this is why it was really helpful. Like I said, Max kind of put this all together, the numbers on this. You're fully active if you play every game plus training camp in the XFL, you're on the roster every week. 54,000, that's the minimum you're going to get. 56,800, that is your minimum that you're going to get in the USFL. That includes the training camp and all that stuff. 2 wins if you're a 2-win team. So if you're not on Kirby Wilson's Pittsburgh Maulers, if you're a 2-win team in the XFL, you're going to get 5,600. That's when it starts kind of breaking even. 5 wins is going to put you to 59,000 over the 56,800 in the USFL. So it's that 2-3 game. You cross that 3-win, whatever. Does that seem like a reasonable? Like, okay, I'm assuming I'm going to be on a team that's going to win at least 3 games.
I mean, that's like basically balancing fair play in the league. Like, what kind of average wins are we going to have? Are we going to have like disparities between teams? Because that was something that happened in the USFL. It became very clear early on who the good teams were. Like, it was going to be the Stars. It was going to be the Stallions. It was going to be the Breakers. Like, you could tell pretty quickly which teams were going to be excelling and pushing for the playoffs and which ones were not. At least, in my opinion, from a football viewer standpoint, it seemed very obvious to see who was going to make it that far. And the in the XFL, it's hard to say, because like halfway through the season last time, I thought, okay, well, we knew Houston was an undefeated team. Like, if you're on that Houston team, you have this pace goal, you are rolling. Like, you are so excited, you are ready, you're ready to rock and roll. But if you're on, say, the Vipers, who were 1-4 and just had some bad turn of luck, then it's like, well, this sucks. I'm losing money, and my team's just not getting it done. But maybe if there's like a second half turnaround, maybe they would have made some more noise. I don't know. That's the thing. It's kind of hard to sort of balance that out. Like, can you guarantee that you're going to have 3 or 4 wins? No, you can't. But you can at least have some sort of faith that there's going to be some balanced competition and play in this league. Even though it's hard to with only 8 teams. Like, in the NFL, it makes sense why there's a certain like plateau of wins that you can get to, because you play so many different teams in so many different weeks. But here it's like you've only got 8 teams, so you kind of know who you are versus each team. So that's probably the complicating part of it.
Yeah, so you go through here and you can see if you get 5 wins, like I said, 59,000. If you get 7 wins, the semifinal loss. If you get 7 wins and the title loss. If you get 7 wins and the title victory, the absolute maximum you'll be able to get in the XFL from a regular. We don't know quite what the quarterbacks are going to be compensated. Your normal, everyday person. 93,500 versus 72,500 for the USFL. Tremendous amount of, getting close to hitting 6 figures in spring football, I think is pretty astounding. What do you think about that? And I don't think that 72,500 is anything to sneeze at either. I think these are both, when you consider a CFL, and I have this pulled up too. If you figure your average rookie salary in the CFL is 65,000 Canadian, that's roughly 47,600 US. If you do that, and then you're paying extra Canadian taxes, and you got to go live in Canada and set up all that stuff. You have housing. We'll get into that here, but you have housing taken care of in one way or another. Could you see why both of these leagues would present opposition to players wanting to go play in the CFL now?
Well, again, I think it's more about calendar and opportunity more than it is about the pay. And ultimately, I feel like that's more what it's about, right? Like once you're set in the Canada region, if you're going to be a Canadian player, like you're kind of putting your foot in that door and you're saying, I'm staying here unless something changes drastically, unless you become some superstar like, Nathan Rourke and suddenly you're gone. But I think once you've started to put your feet into those waters, then you've sort of committed to that lifestyle and towards that play style. And eventually, in the CFL, obviously the pay scaling is higher. If you're able to be compensated, if you're a veteran enough player, you're going to be able to get that money just further down the road. This is maybe a little more impactful at the beginning, but again, the premonition from these leagues maybe is not that these players are going to stick around forever. That's kind of what's going on. These players are not planning to stay around for this long term. Now, I don't know if that's something they need to change to immediately, but maybe they need to think about down the road of saying, do you want to have these guys be around for the long term? And if so, you're going to need to start stepping up your pay scaling here. But at the beginning, I don't have a huge issue with it just because it's so early in the process, the XFL clearly has already announced from a PR standpoint, like we're trying to put players in the XFL, like that's our goal. The USFL less so, but they're obviously existing for that purpose. But they can wave the banner of Cavante Turpin forever now. Like they got that on their back pocket.
Pro Bowler Cavante Turpin,
Pro Bowler Cavante Turpin. So that's the thing. They can celebrate that. So I don't know. Like I think yes, maybe 5 years down the road they need to start thinking about how they're going to compete against the CFL in those terms. But right now, I don't think so. I think these are just players who are trying to get in right now for a year and then try to bounce somewhere else.
The interesting thing, to me, it makes both of these leagues feel a lot more, because again, like when we get people online and the USFL guys are unionizing, and what does that mean? Or they're trying to hold out, they want this money. Like these are not $1 million contracts, but also these, like I said, it is very difficult to go play in the CFL. And I've had interviews with players. I've heard interviews with players, and I got to have 2 houses and my family's down. I only get to see them on the bye weeks, and we get 3 a year, and I got to pay them to fly up to Montreal, and they got to stay. Like, here's a lot different than like, I can go play in Birmingham and make $72,000 in 4 months. Is like really not. It should be better. This all should be better, but it's really, it's a good place to start for both these leagues. And I don't want to because I don't want players coming to be like, we deserve a lot more. Cause of course you do. You always do. The other note here was talking about, with getting the playoff bonuses, you figure half the teams make the playoffs, about half the league's fully active players would be in line to make those bonuses. Just, the way this isn't like the NFL playoff schedule. The other interesting the note on this is, so if you are inactive in the XFL, you go through training camp, you're on the inactive roster the whole time, 19,000, that's the bare minimum you'll make, versus 28,000 fully inactive so obviously if you ride the inactive, whatever, USFL is taking care of you, a much higher base floor there for that.
Yeah, no, that's certainly worth noting there as well. And I think that's, maybe in response to the other league's doings and what they're trying to negotiate in that regard. I think that kind of going back to what you were saying, as far as like what the league is going to do with, players coming in and demanding more compensation. I see that. And I think like that's labor negotiations that are going to maybe not stall as much in the initial setting because there's not as much money being thrown around, like this isn't, like you said, it's not millions, it's tens of thousands, it's thousands. It's much, much lower stakes. I mean, it's still important because, these leagues have to operate financially and say, hey, we can't just, start dishing out six figures left and right, but you got to at least start from somewhere. And I think it's important. I mean, it's interesting seeing, we're so used to seeing like these big labor negotiation battles on gigantic fronts like the NHL and NFL and MLB and NBA and all this money being tossed around and all that. And here it's kind of, I mean, for the players' organization and union, it's the same thing here where it's like, this is lower scale, it's lower stakes. It's still important, but it's lower stakes. So I think they can still have a healthy relationship between those two parties. I think at least in the initial outset, because there's not as much there, which now that I say that all out loud, I guess it makes sense that the USFL was able to maybe make it so accommodable with the UFPA before the season, 4 months before the season started.
Yeah. And, and I got into this with Mike and whatever, I'm not a big proponent of like defending big Redbird or Fox Sports or whatever. Like these are the players, like, and that's why, like, if I get hard or question some of this stuff, it's, okay, the USFL, we got where the win bonus is, like we're rolling that into the base pay, but you're not paying. I mean, theoretically, you're paying less because not 100% of players are going to win every week, but it's not like you're saying, here's an extra 50 grand that we weren't paying you before. I mean, I just always like to keep that in check when it comes to unions and negotiating and all that. I worked when I was a photographer, we were not in a union. And I know that we got taken advantage of in ways that photographers that worked at other stations that were in unions did not get taken advantage of. So there's pros and cons. I always look out for that. Anything else? We'll get into the benefits and the tax stuff here. I don't want this segment to be forever tonight, but any other interesting scenarios? I mean, you guys see the numbers up on here. If you're watching on the video, I assume if you're listening on the audio, check out the YouTube for this. Anything else that strikes you from columns A to D here?
No, I think it's just it's just interesting based on, like we were saying earlier, whether or not you are really going to bet on yourself as far as if you think that you're going to be on a team that's really going to be rocking and rolling, or if you're just going to be doing training camp, practice squad. Like if you're a fringe player in this instance, like, for example, if you're someone in the NFL Alumni Academy, if you're somebody who's kind of already fringe as it is getting into the XFL training camp, would it behoove you to maybe sort of make a lateral move at that point if you think that you're not even going to be guaranteed in this spot in the first place? Like, yes, it was a guaranteed training camp spot, which we went at nauseum at before, but it's just kind of interesting to think about, like, if that sort of factor is coming in and you're seeing this sort of lateral compensation. Now, maybe if you start to think that those players would rather maybe start to look at being on the inactive roster in the USFL instead. That's the pool of players. There might be a shift now in certain terms of, like, maybe when certain players in the lower end might try to start thinking about being inactive in different leagues, which again is interesting because that's not something we see at the highest level.
Yeah, the other interesting thing, just while you bring up the Alumni Academy, is if you are on the active roster, you will have to pay back 30% of when you're on the active, when you're on the active roster. So if you're in the XFL, if you're making that $5,000 a week, 30% of that is taken out each week. If you did go through the Alumni Academy to pay that back, and again, this might not be a thing come next season, but at least right now, if you're one of those 50 whatever players that got drafted and did all that. Other notes for here with the housing, both are going to be taken care of in training camp. When it comes to the why did that pop up on there? When it comes to the regular season, XFL is going to take care of your housing. And obviously in the hotels in Arlington, you're going to have a roommate. USFL, you're getting the $400 a week stipend. The XFL is covering meals. I remember because Donnie Woods made fun of that when they announced that. I thought, well, why the hell? Why are you paying all that? They're paying for meals. USFL, you get meals taken care of if you're in training camp. Otherwise, part of that $400 stipend will go towards meals. Game day meals are being taken care of, but outside of that, the player will have to use, either part of the roommates, and then they send some of that money that way, or you can pay it out of your paycheck. But does that vibe, anything I've said with that, not make sense?
No, it does. I mean, it's just, again, it's essentially attacking the same problem in different methods depending on what your role is on that roster, right? Like that's kind of how it is, especially with the USFL. It's more predicated on like, okay, you're actually in you're in a training camp, and if not, then it's not going to be as accommodable. But this stipend is really a huge deal because obviously without the housing stipend, that's became maybe a difficulty for a lot of players who are looking into the hub model going into the future, which Mike Mitchell has reported at before in terms of, we don't know if they're going to end up in, say, Detroit, for example, but there was already rumblings about, well, what does that mean in terms of the housing market? Because it's very different. It might be a little bit more harder to live in somewhere like that as opposed to Birmingham and Memphis. So that's something that is good to see that's included. We're going to still see how impactful it is, but it is a step for sure.
Interesting. And Ryan said in his interview, Ryan Cave here coming up, that supposedly they looked and they thought, we don't want to give away the northern hub, but they looked in where potentially the three cities, a 1-bedroom apartment is about $1,600 a month. So you figure you can either do that on your own. If you want to save money, you can double up or whatever you want that way. Clearly easier to share housing. If you and I were to share a house or whatever, then it would be to share a hotel room or a 1-bedroom apartment and all of that. The other interesting thing I noticed, so obviously XFL has no tuition, whatever right now, where they're not paying back. USFL, you're able to do that $1,400, whatever, where they're going to pay back some of the credit if you're doing the online classes. I asked Ryan that. I'm like, is anyone even doing that? Like, because I know that's a big selling point, but if no one actually does it, and he goes, yeah, like Vad Lee is going to graduate and there's a bunch of other people and all that stuff. So that is a selling point. That is something that players are utilizing, which is great. So you definitely include that in the benefits package in the USFL's category. Because if like no one's doing it, then you're like, well, I'm not going to really give you guys. But Ryan was able to list off like 10 different players. So you get the $1,400 for that. The other interesting thing, USFL is doing $150 a week into a 401k while the season is. So it's 12 weeks, $1,800 total for that. Does a 401k contribution at $150 a week do anything for you, Andy, or would you rather have that in your pocket?
I think long-term, I think that's obviously much more viable to have it in a 401k. Are the players thinking about that at this stage? Again, maybe not as much because they're thinking about, I'd rather have that in my pocket. But, it's versus something like playing in the NFL, you have to be in the league for a certain number of years if you want to get a pension. I think it's 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. But it's something that they, at least while they're making money, are also being able to invest longer term. And so, yeah, look, ultimately, I think a 401k is always a smart plan. Obviously, I think it's always the viable option. Whether these players, whether they want it in their pocket at that moment, it really, again, depends on what their moves are immediately after the season or after football or after whatever. Like, that's kind of the other thing of it too. But if it were me, I would be convinced into submitting into a 401k because, again, long term, ultimately, when you're not playing football anymore and you're sitting on your couch, like down the road, you're going to need that.
I don't know. I don't know what 1,800 in a 401k does. Like, I don't know. I don't know if that, I am not a tax person. I don't want it to be like Reed is poo-pooing anything, but like I am talking with our people about contributing this year because I'm self-employed. Like, I have to contribute a lot more than 1,800 into that. So I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy with that, whatever. So if you balance out the benefits, 26,000 benefits to the USFL, to 20,000 for the XFL. I don't quote me how Max got all these numbers on this stuff, but that's roughly what it is. Like I said, USFL definitely gets the win for that. And I will say justifiably so because people are utilizing that tuition, puts that over the top. And the 401k, I thought that was a great idea when the schooling stuff came out. I said that. The other just interesting thing to think about with this, if you, depending on where you are, the tax rates you're going to pay, XFL 0, no state income tax in Texas. And then depending where you are in the USFL here. Alabama, 6%. That's going to be Birmingham and New Orleans. They have this weird tax structure where like you pay 2% for the first $500 you make, and then 4% for the next $2,500. And then you pay 5% after that. Plus, you can read it on here, plus a Birmingham occupation tax, but more tax in Alabama, depending on where the northern hub would be, if it's in Detroit versus the school they're looking at outside of Detroit. 4.5 versus 5.45. And if you're in Tennessee, you're living scot-free. You're same with Texas with that. Houston and Memphis are going to be living tax-free here. I do think that's worthwhile to talk about just because, like you said, we're talking thousands of dollars here, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Thoughts on that? And interesting how basically all the different sections all have different tax breaks.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that comes up in conversations even at the highest levels as far as millions, because then you're talking about millions being taxed, right? And it's still important here, obviously. I mean, these are guys that are trying to just have a living and doing this at the same time. So yeah, this is important. Tennessee, I mean, that's the new hub. That's the new, the whole Memphis thing. So I guess you want to be on the showboats or the gamblers now, obviously, and you're going to be able to get those benefits. So that's the thing. Like, you're going to be able to sort of allocate yourself to those two teams. So that's a huge deal, I think, in terms of financially. Again, now you have to. So again, you're factoring in. Okay, I'm on an inactive roster or an active roster. Now I'm in the USFL. Okay, now which teams am I on in the USFL in terms of tax rates, all that? That's something that they have to think about as far as if they're going to be going over in that way. So that is something that I think is definitely worth discussing. It is interesting that Michigan's still a little bit slower than Alabama. So that at least maybe will not be as harsh as far as like the housing costs, for example, which was the whole big point about it. But that Tennessee thing is really interesting. And I think that's why maybe Memphis might be seen as more attractive as far as which players want to go there. But again, this is teams drafting, right? This is teams making personnel decisions. So it's not up to the players so much, but it is up to people who want to consider what if they think they have an opportunity to go to one of those teams and maybe not pay taxes.
Yeah, so I'm just looking here. So if you're in the Michigan hub, Detroit, whatever, if you're in that Detroit, if they end up playing at Ford Field or whatever, $3,095 is the difference of taxes that you're paying for that 5.45% on 56. I mean, I just did kind of whatever the base minimum versus you're getting an extra $3,100 if you're playing in Tennessee. Basically, it's just interesting to think about because that's extra, half week of pay. I mean, however you want to look at it that way, but that you're paying or not paying, all comes into factor there. And then obviously everybody in the XFL is paying no state income tax, which has to be kind of, these things just have to be a nightmare for the USFL people trying to figure out like, okay, because basically you're a pseudo resident, whatever, for the time, if you're working there and paying, like it has to be a nightmare to deal with the taxes for the USFL this year.
Oh yeah, I mean, you need a league of accountants for this. I mean, this is a whole process, but you have to do that if you're going to have hubs in different places. This is something I maybe was briefly mentioned in certain circles, but like this is something that you have to consider if you're going to be playing in different areas, not just the proximity of the travel, but also just the financial implications of having to play in those different places, as opposed to practicing out of the hub in Dallas and Arlington for the XFL. And now this is a little bit, this is a little bit of a different beast as far as these teams being and living in the areas and in the communities. If they talk about, the whole thing about transforming the communities in Alabama, or in Birmingham, then, you're going to have to keep doing that and considering that here. Is it going to be financially viable to keep doing that model going forward? But obviously that's their plan and they're sticking with it. But yeah, I would not want to be an accountant for this league.
Anything else before we get out of here? I guess we have the chart. If anyone wants, I mean, I'm sure we can send over a copy of this, but that was at least helpful to kind of look. I mean, I'm sure it's tiny, but if you're looking on a full screen, it's got to be decent here. I've got it sized. Any other takeaways? I mean, we talked high floor, low ceiling on all that, the housing and all of that stuff. Pointing out, like I said, just that more active spots in the XFL, so that's more players getting paid that higher wage, at least this, balancing out here, hopefully in years to come with the CBA for the USFL, but more players, getting that active roster pay, more, I guess the league's paying more for that on that side. But any other major takeaways, anything else that you had on your notes?
I I think the win bonuses ultimately for the XFL are not a bad idea. If there's any pushback on it, look, I don't think that's really what the players are going into the league for. That's a cherry on top of what they're already getting. And I think in terms of just getting on the field and playing is great. I think it's wonderful if they're able to like win and celebrate. We'll see if they're going to be crushing hard seltzer cans in the locker room again. I mean, that's really the biggest thing, right? Like that's one of the biggest like social media things that they had going for them last time. And I think if they're going to do that, that's great. That's like, pageantry. But as far as the win bonuses go, no, I mean, it's not a huge thing for me as far as whether it's incentivizing or holding anything over the players' heads. I mean, they're ultimately there to compete and get tape and hopefully forward their careers. So, but this contract's interesting. And again, it just gives options to players, gives them more to consider, more to weigh with their agents and really think about going forward. So it's for that purpose, this is great.
Yeah, like I said, I do not have a dog in the fight at all, but much amiss to what people want to think. But I just think it's interesting. I'm sure, that you could construe the numbers one way, you could construe the numbers the other way. I think there's pros and cons to both. Like I said, if that 93,000 is crazy for the XFL. If you could be on the PJ Walk, well, PJ would be in a different, but if you're the Cam Walker of the world or whatever, or Cam Phillips, and you're right, you're on the Roughnecks and you're going in and you're winning the championship game, going undefeated, like that's pretty scary money. I mean, in a good way. But otherwise, I think it's good. We got the training camp in here. We kind of worked to get some of these details this week, so I hope all of this is correct. Like I said, this is all that was provided and corroborated with Ryan over at the United Football Players Association. So if any of this is wrong, please let me know. I'm sure something will be wrong, but it was just like we did last time. We did all of our math and then we were wrong on the tuition, but this is what I have. You see the numbers, you can check our homework. Anything else from you, Andy? I really appreciate you hopping on late tonight.
Absolutely, as always. And also, I never professed to be a mathematician. Okay.
You're a professor, damn it. I'm not a mathematician. Thank you, guys. I should have some more good interviews here at the show. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks.
Well, I think this is the third time now we've had the CFL super agent Darren Gill on. How are you doing, sir?
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
This is good. We had you on back CFL at some point years ago. And then I think when we had the original USFL stuff last year, I brought you on. But now we're getting into XFL year one, USFL year two. For people that maybe don't know you, haven't watched the CFL segments, just a little bit of background about who you are, kind of who you've represented, just so we know why you're such a valuable resource to have on.
I appreciate it. Yeah, no, I've been representing CFL players for close to 20 years, represented hundreds of players. My client base is typically nationals or Canadians, but I've represented Americans and brought several players in, guys like Ken Dorsey years ago, and also sent some players south of the border. So I've had experience in the National Football League, Canadian Football League, and with both Americans and the Canadians. And I've certainly been around this league for a long time and seen several iterations, several CBAs, and certainly the evolution of the league over the last 20 years as well.
Let's get, so we're getting, like I said, getting in here. This is exciting. And I think this is great for the players because here in the States, having, competing spring leagues is only going to help drive, value up of contracts. Seeing this year USFL in their new CBA that they're getting ready to pass, raising baseline salaries by 19%, getting rid of win bonuses, where the USFL minimum would be $56,000. That's assuming a 3-week training camp, maxing out at $71,800 for that. From and I know that caught Dave Naylor's attention too online this week, having the spring league, increase salaries year over year from year one to year two. What do you make of that? The $56,000 baseline for USFL contract this year?
Yeah, I think competition is great. It's great for every football player out there. I think it forces leagues to get better. I think the overall growth of the game is going to help everybody. Inevitably, I'm hoping this all trickles down to the grassroots where we see more youth football players playing the game, which hopefully then turns into, youth football fans and players. And this is a great thing that's happening. What's also happening as well as just having more opportunities is obviously more money. It's forced the Canadian Football League to change their salary structure. It's forced a more attractive kind of entry-level salary. But obviously, the inevitable challenge for all these leagues is these careers are short. So, the entry level salary is okay, but, if this is still a 3-year career path, when we're looking at kind of that average length of your career, it's still not a great viable option for these players because honestly, it's not a 10-year window that they have to make that. So I think what is nice about this is that the leagues are sensing the competition. The real struggle for the player, obviously, and we'll get into this, is really having to make decisions around where do I go. So more options is great, but also you're having more difficult decisions and also, roster alignment and having some sense of less turnover, which is really what everyone's been seeking. It's been a problem in the Canadian Football League with 1-year contracts. Becomes even harder right now. You're gonna have guys, skipping between leagues, just always trying to find kind of the fresh hot ride.
I know last we spoke, I believe you had said that at least one of your clients was at least talking to entertaining USFL. Now in the year, because it's been about a year since I think we've talked to you, XFL, USFL, is that entering more into the conversation that you're hearing with players and other people you're talking to?
Yeah, I'm definitely getting a lot less calls from US-based agents looking for opportunities in the Canadian Football League, whereas that used to be, a really, I used to work with a lot of US agents helping get their players to the Canadian Football League. Less of that's happening. There's no doubt about that. That's changed the landscape. Obviously, this is just the reality of being in Canada. Our weather is not as nice. It's a foreign concept to go to, Regina, Saskatchewan, or Winnipeg, Manitoba. You're much better off being in Birmingham, Alabama, or somewhere closer to home. So I think, even before we get into this notion of, what is the salary looking like? I think the concept of going to Canada is something that a lot of people don't even have to explore. So that's changed. But certainly, where I used to get desperate pleas from agents going, please help me, please find a place for my player. I see a lot less of those. And usually it's, we've explored these other leagues. Can you help them get to the Canadian Football League?
It's interesting, and the idea too, and on here in both their own way, XFL, paying for housing, right? They're hubbing everyone in Arlington, and then obviously flying out to the games. USFL, they're doing the housing stipend, $400 a week. Because that, and I've talked to players about that. The whole time I've done the podcast. Like, well, I got to fly up to Canada. I got to maintain the whole household up here. Also in the States. If I have a family or a partner or however all that works out, like. It's a real challenge, right? CFL presents those other challenges. Am I looking at that correctly?
Yeah, no, I think that's just the reality of the situation. Now, on the flip side, there's enough players in this league who have come from programs in the US that are talking to players they played with who are saying, man, this is the greatest place. The league has obviously been around for a long time. There's stability. These communities are ingrained and entrenched in the game. So, if you get to go and play in front of the crowd in Regina, Saskatchewan, if you're a Rough Rider, you're going to feel very similar to what you might have felt, or even more, depending what college you came from. You're going to feel that. Some other leagues right now are paying players well, but haven't necessarily brought the crowds in, haven't attracted the fan attention. So this league also has some other things that benefit, certainly the player of going, well, this is a real pro experience versus a league that right now is trying to get off the ground. And not that this league hasn't had its financial issues with teams going bankrupt, but this is currently a very stable, league with very stable ownership and a pretty good fan base. So I think with the drawbacks comes some positives. And also, a lot of the coaches in the league have obviously coached in the US in a major program. So, their network's bringing guys up. So it's not just it's in Canada, but I think it's trying to find unique ways to attract that talent's becoming a different game.
We have a question on here about Genius Sports and working with the CFL. Has the league been pretty transparent with that, about how they're able to kind of project future revenues now? I know they're looking into this American TV deal, right? We have the schedule and everyone's losing their minds about that. But have they kept you guys pretty apprised of future revenue projections?
I think, the word transparency comes with a caveat in terms of what that means. It's gotten a lot better since I've been around, but I don't believe we're at the point where we truly believe that there's transparency between the league and the players. And with that being said, truthfully, not every league is either. So I don't think the Canadian Football League is in its own category of less than transparent leagues. I think they're making strides and they're trying to go down that path. And certainly every CBA has allowed that conversation to be tabled, and we're seeing it improve. In terms of the nuances of the Genius Sports deal and whether we have pure transparency, I don't think so, but there's certainly been many steps in the right direction, and I certainly believe that today the players are better informed than they ever have been. So that's a strong reflection of the relationship between the PA and the league, but also a very strong reflection of how the PA communicates with his own players.
When we're looking at the minimums here, right? 54 XFL, 56 USFL. People are always talking, okay, in the CFL and like the rookie deal or what's going on. Like, what is the average CFL player? I know that's so hard to say, but because there's a difference, right? If I'm coming in the bare minimum rookie deal versus not most Canadians are getting that. Can you give some idea of like where the salary range is in the CFL for the American listeners?
Yeah, it's the CFL obviously has a pretty wide disparity, right? And it really speaks to the notion of that turnover cycle. You have some players that never get out of that cycle because they're always at the lower end of the salary range. They're always kind of around that league minimum, which has kind of been, around that 60, 65, 70 range over the last few years. So you've got some players that can never get out of that cycle because they're just viewed as like the last guy in. But once you make it to the next contract, the jump is substantial. And that's what I think the players do appreciate, is that if you can make it in this league, and we're, even if you're a non-quarterback, the quarterback's obviously being in a category unto themselves. But if you're a star non-quarterback, you can make north of $150,000. So you can get into that $150,000 to $200,000 bracket. And that's where, you start to see a little bit of a difference between the CFL and those other leagues we're talking about because of that earning opportunity. So they are selling a bit of that hope down the line of going, man, you know what, here's Adam Big Hill and here's Willie Jefferson and here's a bunch of guys who have made a good name for themselves in this league and are doing very well financially.
Yeah, I think the ceiling's higher, right? But then the floor, because it's 65 Canadian, right? So the floor is about the same, but there is, like you said, you can get into those elite, Kenny Lawler, breaking the bank and going to Edmonton, kind of all that stuff. From a negotiating standpoint, where the USFL, the union there decided this year, we would rather sacrifice or take some of the win bonuses and roll that into a higher minimum salary. What do you just think about that from like a negotiating standpoint of, where the XFL, we're going to pay you less, you have a chance of earning more through win bonuses. USFL, we're going to get rid of that, but then you have a higher base level.
I never liked the concept of the win bonuses. And it goes back to the arena football days where, you get like 2 food stamps, but if you win, you get $150 or whatever it was. I think as a player, or as a human being, I think you need some secure income, or you need some more guaranteed perspective on what that's going to look like. Because obviously your bills don't vary if you win or lose. So regrettably, the win bonus, although it's nice, you're better off finding ways to guarantee your income so you can project what that looks like. So I think you start to look like you're a little bit more grown up when your structure makes more sense. I think you look a little bit more like an upstart when you're varying how players get paid.
It's interesting. That's good. Talking more about the Canadian and like the taxes and exchange rates and stuff, is that, besides just going to Canada, is that a major factor as well that people consider?
I'll tell you this, most players who are initially considering which league to go play in, or agents, that's not even a consideration because most of them aren't even thinking about that at all. They're just hoping for a place to play. Now, once, they get that first paycheck or they bring it back to the US bank and they see with the exchanges, I think it kind of hits them differently at that point. But I think when players are looking for a place to play, they're just, and listen, I'm not saying that players get desperate. This is not the message, but I think at that point they're looking for an opportunity. And it is kind of interesting what happens when the player goes from, man, just give me an opportunity, I want to play anywhere, to when he makes a team, he's going, man, I'm not making as much as I should somewhere else, right? And that's just a matter of perspective of anybody, right? It's like, if you're desiring to go on vacation, man, if I just give me a vacation anywhere, then you get to that, destination you're at, well, the food's not so good, and it rained a couple of days, and then you leave there and you're like, it wasn't so good, but meanwhile you were just desperate for a vacation. So I'm not trying to make it sound like it's that bleak, but in terms of considerations, it's not something that I usually hear. Most players want to know how much play time they're going to get. How long is the contract? So when can we start renegotiating and getting next big deal? Because everybody understands that whatever move you're making, wherever you're going, it's a stepping stone. That's the vision, right? So am I stepping to the National Football League? Am I stepping to my next contract? Where am I going next? And I think that's always kind of the top of mind question.
Could you see if XFL and USFL surviving here? We're paying players the weekly stipends and all that. Would the CFL be like, hey, we need to start right? Are some of the contracts, do they get some housing stipends in there, or is it mostly they have to figure it out themselves? Is it a case by case?
Very rare would you see it on a rookie contract. You'll see some, but on a veteran contract, you will see it. Now, truthfully, if they're going to play player X, let's say they're paying them $100,000, you can get a housing allowance as part of that, but that's going to be included in your 100. Now, the good news is your housing allowance will be non-taxed. So there's a benefit to it, but it's not something that's necessarily given above and beyond. The team will figure out what your value is, and they're going to say, hey, we want to pay you 100. And then the agent or the player with the agent kind of decide how are we going to chop it up, right? We're going to get a signing bonus. We're going to use some in housing. I want a travel allowance. I want a workout bonus, so you can, then kind of carve that number up. But the benefit obviously being is that it's non-tax money, as would something like kind of a travel allowance where, if you want to, take a vacation or use it to fly your family to and from the city you're playing, and you can do that. So you definitely try to help your players find as much ways to maximize that, whatever that bundle of cash is that they're getting.
In terms of the CFL this year, there's people notably marked the lack of quarterback play, right? Outside of like Nathan Rourke and all that. With the XFL now kind of doing the centralized quarterback development, right? We're bringing in everyone ahead of time, working with Jordan Palmer. Do you see the CFL doing something like that to help? And we have the question here. They can get the guys more. USFL and XFL are going to get guys more that want to play right now, right? I don't need to come in and do a 3-year waiting. Here we've seen like Taylor Cornelius take a couple years, get up to speed in Edmonton. Like, do you see CFL trying to kind of adopt a different way of how they're looking at that, of basically like come up here and figure it out versus, hey, let's try to cultivate these guys from the beginning?
I think disruption leads to innovation, and the XFL model, the new version of the model, certainly has caught attention from the Canadian Football League in terms of how are they going to develop players, because that's obviously top of mind right now. It's all been done by teams, but because of limited budgets, and now you've got a football operations cap, you really have to start making choices about how much kind of money you spend on development. Because, hate to say it, it's a win now league, right? So there really is no incentive by anybody on your football operations staff to develop somebody long term. Now, if you can marry the two where development and winning come together, well, have at it. But we all know that there usually is more incentive to win now, which means that, a veteran quarterback will have a different value than trying to develop somebody new, especially for, a younger head coach who's going, I don't have 3 years. I don't have 5 years. I got to win today. So I love the model. I think there'll be a lot of eyes on it to see how it works and to see, does it actually achieve its goal by developing players? And B, once you do that, how does the league handle the distribution or dispersal of talent? And I think from that standpoint, there's going to be a lot to learn. And that's what, what's so good about every league that's come, and whether they've come and gone or just come and stayed, is how we all have to learn from it. And I think you're seeing that. I think you've seen the National Football League learn. I think you see now sports, looking to work and imitate others, whether it's playing styles, whether it's coaches that are, referencing each other. So you're going to continue to see that happen. But I think the disruption we're seeing in football is only going to help every other league.
Speaking of XFL here, we're recording this December 21st, week of Christmas. We thought, maybe by the end of the year. XFL still does not have an announced venue for one of its 8 teams. Considering they're kicking off, in February, obviously they're training everyone. Training camps can take place down in Arlington without the venue in place. But was that concern you as someone that's kind of following this from the outside?
I think, the one thing that the Canadian Football League brings to every player is certainty. Right. And that's what, if I'm a CFL GM or a head coach, or if I'm an agent, that's what I'm selling. Right. Is there certainty? There's a certain level of guarantee around the league's wherewithal, where the teams are going to be playing, how the structure works. There's less risk. So obviously, in seeing what's happening in the XFL, despite the fact that you're going to believe a lot in who's leading that league, and with obviously with The Rock and with his group around it, you're going to get excited about Danny Garcia as a leader and where this thing can go. But I think you're going to have some reservations about whether this is just another version of something that doesn't work. And I'm not saying that that's you make a short-term decision because of what's happening, but I think if you're projecting long-term, you have to weigh the risks of whether that league's going to be solvent or not.
This isn't even like, just from your outside perspective, looking at both of these, you have the USFL owned by Fox Sports. They kind of control everything top to bottom, but then you have Danny and The Rock and kind of all this stuff. Where does your opinion sway of which one you think is kind of the more long-term viable solution?
Yeah, I think both of them have built a model that can work, and I think the question around it will be: is the success of the league predicated on football or on all the other intangibles? And if it's football, couldn't these leagues build compelling enough cases to be a realistic competitive football league or not? And I say that only because, I think Canadians have come to accept in a good way what Canadian football is. I think Americans have a higher standard. And the concern would be, is this the same version of football that people are expecting, or is this really viewed as the minor leagues? And unfortunately, minor league sports don't get the same attention and treatment as major league sports. And I think that's the question: is can they find a space in everybody's football needs, or are they viewed as less than? And luckily in Canada, the Canadian Football League is not viewed as less than; it's viewed as other than. Most football fans in Canada are fans of both leagues. They might have a preference. I'm not saying preference can't exist, but they view one as being different. And it is, I get it. Like the balls are bigger and the field is bigger and the rules are different, but it's just viewed as a different brand of it. Whereas if you look, and I'm using a Canadian example because it's closer to home, minor hockey, so any league below the NHL is viewed as less than the NHL. Now the structure tells us that it is, but those leagues run a lot differently. They're not trying to compete, right? They're not looking like that league. They're like, we are minor league sports, and we're going to ride buses, and we're going to hopefully make a career, and you guys are here chasing the dream. So the balance around trying to be a minor league but act like a major league is really kind of how I see it. And my long-term concern would be is they're minor league sports that are trying to act grown up, and I don't know if that works as well, because that costs a lot of money. And if you look at, the fan base, and if you're looking in the stands and the camera's panning around and there's 62 people there, it's hard to make it work.
No, and that actually segues perfectly into my last question here of just, we went and interviewed Coach Beck of the St. Louis team back in the summer. And, his thing was, if every single one of my players made it onto an NFL roster here at the end of the season, I would deem that as a success, right? And here you have the USFL, and they're touting, and Kevontae Turpin got signed to the Cowboys, and this is going on, and this goes on. If they sway too much into that, right? If they veer too much into that, where it could actually potentially hurt salaries and things, right? Because we are just kind of a minor league. That is a concern. And do you see you share similar concerns?
The minor league model works when it's connected to the major league, because the major league has a vested interest in funding that minor league sport. In this case, these are minor leagues trying to operate independent. And yes, it's nice if your star player could go from your USFL or XFL or CFL roster to the National Football League. That's a great calling card for a coach or a GM to say, come play for me. Unfortunately, it doesn't pay the bills. This is not the European soccer model where you can then sell that player and you get paid for it, right? The MLS, has become kind of a mix of, let's bring some old stars over, but let's also have some young stars that our clubs can then sell. The Vancouver Whitecaps sold Alphonso Davies to Bayern Munich, one of the, I think maybe the largest transfer ever, and that's going to fund their operations, right? It's a new way of operating in the MLS because they recognize the fact that they're a second, third, fourth, fifth tier league, wherever they rank in the soccer world. When it comes to these football leagues, and I've always been a proponent of, listen, Canadian Football League players or any football player not in the NFL has a contract. Teams can have a buyout. If you're a National Football League team and you want player X, if you want Cameron Wake, who went on to have a phenomenal NFL career, and I'm the BC Lions, you buy him out of his contract, right? So at least there's an incentive for me now to go and develop these players, because in the end, if he's really good, I can sell him off. But unfortunately, that's a little bit harder model, because now a player is going to go, well, I've got 3 league choices and I'm caught in your league and you're going to try and sell me off. And if you don't get the right asking number, I can't leave. So I guess to kind of go back to your question is, the model works in places where either the major league team funds the minor league team, or the minor league team can sell its players and make money and fund its operations. And that's what, if you look at, the English Premier League, where there's several leagues, or, football in England, right? There's several leagues. You can get relegated. So you could be a 3rd division team and you're not tied to any of the first 2, but then you can sell your player and you can make money, right? So you can find this talented kid who nobody knew of, and you can sell him, right? Well, that's not going to happen in these leagues, So again, if you're the coach, that's awesome. Hey, come play for me, because every 2 years I get a guy who goes to the league. Awesome. But if you're that team owner, you're like, I don't care about that anymore. I want to keep that guy here because people are coming to see him. When he leaves, I don't get anything.
Last question for me today. I really appreciate your time. I think we talked to you last year, kind of when the USFL stuff originally came out. Just welfare check on you. Like, how do you feel here? Where USFL is making it to year 2, XFL is starting up. I mean, better, worse? How do you feel right now about the spring football?
I think it's great. Honestly, I think, again, going back to our earlier comment, the more leagues, the better. I think it's great for the game. Obviously, we've seen the youth football numbers plummet. This hopefully continues to keep the game top of mind. We get more kids playing. It's all about growing the pie, right? And if we can keep growing the pie, more players get paid, more fans watch the game, more kids start playing. That's great for the game of football, because obviously, I represent players in the Canadian Football League. I've represented players in the NFL. I'm a football fan, right? I want to see this sport succeed. I want to see it grow. And honestly, the more people that are turning their eyeballs to it is it's like the more is the merrier. And I love that aspect that, leagues are, and obviously the more, TV contracts you get, this is just great. So, I think it's great. I want every league to flourish. Obviously, I would hope that the success of one league isn't predicated on the failure of the other. I understand that within that, there is likely going to be competition for talent. That's cool. Right. But that doesn't mean that one league needs to have more success than the other. We'll see if there's room for all these leagues. I think that's what the real big question is. But I want them all to succeed. And I think that's great for players, which is kind of where I usually sit. That's great for owners who will be happy. It's great for anybody who's investing. It's great for sponsors. So I think I like where it's going. And I really hope that we're not talking about the demise of another league or what went wrong with this one in 12, 18, or 24 months.
Well, Darren, the CFL super agent, really appreciate you coming back on. Always good insights here on the, Christmas week and everything else. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it today. We have leadership of the United Football Players Association, Ryan Cave, and then the president, Kenneth Farrow on. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good. Thanks for having us on.
Good, man. Glad to be here.
It was good. Exciting times last week, getting all that going. A bunch of questions today, really hot button issue here, right? Kind of comparing everything between the XFL and the USFL player salary wise. So I really appreciate it. I guess first off, we'll start with Kenneth and then Ryan. Like, how are you guys feeling now? We're getting everything agreed to, right? They're going to, vote and sign and all that. But how do you guys feel everything went?
I think it went well. I think we definitely, reached our goal of wanting to get the players' voices heard and address some of the issues that were, kind of outstanding with the guys after kind of them going through that first season. And I think Ryan has done a fantastic job with all of his experience from the Arena League and the things that he's done in the past. It's, so he definitely led the charge on this. And, we're excited that the guys are kind of getting what they want and really happy about it.
Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, man. Hey, it's been a heck of a few months since we kind of got this thing rolling down in Birmingham, and I'm grateful for Nick and Kenneth for kind of bringing me on to this and reaching out. And we were able to put something together from the whole team with the UFPA to a great partnership with the United Steelworkers. Everybody's been amazing and great, and just it really came together by really listening to the players, listening to their main concerns, and making sure they had a voice. Because, every major sports organization has a players association / union, whatever you want to call it. So it was key that those guys got a chance to voice their concerns and see what worked, what didn't work, and make improvements there.
I know there was some, when there was the vote to unionize over the summer, turnout and all that. Do you feel like there was a better turnout here in terms of the members and kind of getting everyone involved in the CBA?
Man, so the hardest thing you ever going to do is organize, guys, right? And then once everything gets approved and everybody and it's official, then everybody wants to be a part of the negotiations and learning what we're going to do and what about the money, what about the housing. Those are some of the big issues: housing, compensation, better health and medical benefits, and we were able to achieve all of those things.
Kenneth, do you feel like you got more involvement this time around?
I think it was actually the opposite. I think Ryan having the expertise of the bargaining and the arena leagues and things like that, that was something that, I don't really have too much experience in. I think, like I said, I think it was the opposite. I think the organizing part, like Ryan said, was kind of the harder part for guys that maybe haven't been too involved in the NFLPA or haven't really been involved in the players union at all, and trying to get those kind of younger guys or guys that just don't have that experience to understand what we can really accomplish if we have this put together and organized and up and running. And so I think, like Ryan said, I think the organizing was probably the more difficult part, just to get everybody on the same page to fully understand, what it can do for and what the benefits can be of accomplishing what we were able to get done.
Kenneth, with being, obviously here, presumably signing the contract here to go to the XFL, does that give you a unique perspective of being able to kind of see a little bit behind the scenes of both of these leagues?
Yeah, I think all of us at this point in time, after, there's probably, I don't know the percentage, but I'm sure it's over 50-60% of guys that are playing in these leagues now, USFL or XFL, that have probably played in these leagues since the AAF in some way, shape, or fashion. And so I think it's just kind of a collective of like guys going through these experiences, going through, seeing what has been good, seeing what hasn't worked. And so I think that, going into the USFL, I think there was a lot of work to be done on the players' behalf. And I think that's where we kind of stepped in as a players association. We're able to do and get a lot of things set up for the guys. And they immediately saw the value of just having an organization on behalf of the players working for them before the union and before the organizing even got started. And so I think as guys start to identify these leagues that they want to play in, they have a better idea of what needs to be in place. What does it sound like? What does it look like going in? And so I think the XFL has done a great job with a lot of the things that they have in place right now. So I'm excited just to get into it and see just the level of professionalism that they bring to the table. I think is going to be very high, and I'm just kind of excited to get back on the field again. But yeah, definitely a unique perspective having played in so many of these leagues.
Ryan, now that we've at least agreed to the CBA, how do the players view the XFL and the USFL? Is it pretty even footing now in terms of financially?
Man, so the jury's still out with that, man. We'll see, man. I mean, one thing you have with the USFL that not knocking the XFL at all, but one thing you have with USFL is they're going into a year two. They got a year under their belt. They know their cost, they know their prices, they know, whatever else they got to understand on the management side of things, but they're going into a year two. The XFL is going to be, this is a new ownership group with, Dwayne Johnson and Redbird Capital and Danny Garcia and all of those good folks over there. This is a new venture for them. So there's always going to be the X expenditure of what the unknowns. So one thing you have with the USFL now is you have a players union, players association with a great partner in Fox that was, they were forthcoming with wanting to sit down and get a deal done and listening to the players. So I will give, I'll give Fox their flowers. So they were willing to sit down and they were really trying to make this a partnership and understanding that you have labor peace right now between the players and the league is a great thing. Knowing that there's stability, knowing that you have a great compensation, healthcare, housing benefits, and all of that good stuff. That's for certain, and that's in contract language. So even though it's a first contract, so guys got to understand this is a first contract, and first contracts are always the toughest thing to get done. But having a willing partner ready to sit there and dance with us, we were able to get a great first contract for guys and looking for a great future with the USFL.
Besides monetary, both of these leagues have kind of their own unique challenges for the players. USFL with the multiple hubs, XFL and the Arlington. Were there non-financial factors that played into maybe one be more just when you're talking with players about being more preferential or not? And we could go Ryan and then to Kenneth on that. Any thoughts?
I mean, it's kind of so basically between both leagues. I mean, let's just be frank. It's going to be a race for arms. You know what I mean? Race for players, race for talent. Who can provide the most benefits for the players, the said players, and you know what I mean, they're going to be overlapping by four or so weeks. So you know what I mean, when it comes down to it, the player, the individual player has to, you know what I mean, do what's best for him. Which league is going to be better suited for me? Which league is going to be better suited for, you know what I mean, someone else? I mean, with the XFL right now, what we know of, you have they're giving housing, but you have a roommate and you're staying in a hotel room, from all understanding. But in the USFL, you're going to have this stipend. You're going to have a $1,600 stipend for a month or $400 a week that you're going to have to go out. And if you don't want to, you can stay in the team hotel, housing, whatever you're going to have per team in training camp and pay, you know what I mean, the discounted rate or whatever rate they have per hub city. Or you can go out and find yourself some living with you and a teammate. You know what I mean? Find you a decent, you know what I mean? What we found is most of the furnished places in these different hub cities are around $1,600, $1,700. So for a 1-bedroom, decent space. So, I mean, you get your roommate, you know what I mean, $2,200, $2,300, $1,600 per person. It makes sense. You keep money in your pocket. So that's one good thing I will say about the USFL.
Kenneth, any thoughts on that? The difference between the leagues?
Yeah, I think, like you said, I think with these leagues, I think just from outside perspective looking in, maybe people don't often think about or take into consideration. This isn't $1 million contracts. These are pretty average salaries, and so I think you have a lot of guys. I've spoke to over 600 guys maybe over the last 2 years, whether it be bankruptcy or whatever the case may be, and kind of hearing that, what was their path after the league folded, having to go in and out of trying to start up some type of career outside of football and things like that. And so when you look at these leagues, these are, pretty average salary paying jobs. And so I think a lot of more factors come into play. It's not like you're, $1 million, I'm going wherever. It's okay, I'm going to get $50,000 this year. And let's look at what the best location is for my family. Let's look at a number of different things. And so I think all these things really play a big role into, where a guy decides to play. It might not be necessarily money. It might be strictly off of location or, housing alone. So I think there's a lot of things that go into the factoring of guys' decisions. And I think people kind of, maybe not fully understand that, like I said, it's not millions of dollars getting around. So guys are really more realistic and kind of forward thinking when they think about the choice that they want to make and which league they want to play.
In terms of, and piggybacking off that, where, all these little things matter, right? Getting the, $50 extra or whatever for training camp. Ryan and I talked before we hit record, it's going to be 4-week or 28-day training camp on that, getting paid. When you're looking and especially negotiating, we're going to have 3 hubs in the USFL, right? We haven't announced, officially, but the players are going to be housed in different areas. XFL, obviously, no state income tax in Texas. Like, was cost of living in the hubs for the USFL, did that factor in at all? Or how did you balance that between people living in Birmingham versus Memphis, or wherever it's going to be in the north?
So we looked at like the rental rates in all these different cities. And for the most part, they're mostly, they aren't the major US cities. You know what I mean? They're the second tier kind of cities between Birmingham, Memphis. You know what I mean? Detroit hasn't been officially announced, but you know what I mean? There's a possibility on Detroit. And you know what I mean? Stay tuned. You never know. So between the hub cities and whatnot, they kind of looked at the average rental rate there and kind of figuring out housing. The biggest thing being, I mean, most guys are coming from wherever they're coming from, so they have another living situation there. So be able to take that burden off of someone and provide that was a big thing for the guys and the player committee that was helping negotiate this thing. So,
in terms of in the last season in the USFL, we had a lot of stuff with like injured reserve and players getting, cut because they're trying to save roster spots. Is there anything this year with the process where they can still be with the team, but maybe not taking up a roster spot, or any changes to the IR this year?
I mean, so the roster is 40-10. We wanted to get a little bit higher, but of course, roster spots account to economic terms. So when you're looking at adding more players to an active roster spot, that's more salary that you got to take on versus someone being on an active roster is less salary someone got to be on. So it's a fine balance between the scales. There are more IR protections in there right now. So if you get placed on IR, you deal with that state's workers' comp, and for the most part, I believe these states have a statute of limitation of 2 years. For those who are listening who don't understand that, statute of limitation is from the date you get injured, you have 2 years in order to file that claim or file that injury with the state's workers' comp. Your team trainer should already be reporting the injury, but you have up to 2 years to file that injury. And whatever the average weekly wage is for that state, that's what you will be receiving. And in most states, is less than what you're making. So let's say a guy's making the minimum salary and he's making $53.50 a week. He's active. He gets hurt. He gets put on IR. Well, that state, we'll take Birmingham. We'll take Alabama. The weekly average, the maximum amount you can receive on workers' compensation in the state of Alabama is $963 or $983, one or two. It's $900 and some change, right? That's not $5,350, right? So what happens is we've negotiated with the league to where during the regular season, when a guy gets hurt, he goes to IR. Now he gets the $963 that the workers' comp is paying him, plus the league will supplement the rest of the pay. So they'll make him whole up to his whatever his roster is, whatever his roster spot is for them. So if he was active, he gets the active pay. If he was inactive, he gets made whole to his inactive pay. So it was another big step, because guys were beforehand, guys were getting cut. They're making $963. That's definitely not going to help them out as much. But they'll get all the benefits of workers' comp, but now you're being made whole for the rest of the season. And in the season, you'll deal specifically with workers' comp. But for the season, you'll receive the majority of all of your salary that you were going to get.
Well, I think that's huge. I'm someone that even through COVID lived through a lot of that with, small business and unemployment and stuff. I think supplementing that, the difference, because it definitely does not, unemployment does definitely not make you whole. So that's good. That's a good step, and you guys feel proud about. I think that's great. Kenneth, in terms of how open has the USFL been with you guys now? How, with the UFPA, how they sit financially here after season one, going into year two, and trying to being transparent about trying to get into more markets and things like that? Have they been pretty open and honest with you guys?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the deal was very, what we worked on was very transparent from both sides. I think, we wouldn't be, I think one of the things that we know as players is that we don't want to put any of these leagues in a situation where it's like, oh, we're crumbling the league, or we're putting the league in jeopardy and I think you hear a lot of that or maybe not a lot, but you hear some of that from, some responses to, you're unionizing in a startup league and things like that. And I think it's just, there's so much more to it than just trying to get more money. Like, I think at the end of the day, like I've said before, the opportunity to go play on ESPN or on Fox or whatever the case may be, outside the NFL is golden to guys. But I think there's been a lot of things that in the past that have not made a lot of sense to us and not have been, as fairly as fair as it could have been. And so I think that was more so the objective going into this is how can we make this fair, but how can we also make this sustainable and last and keep on going with that, with our voice being heard about some of the things that we know as players can make not only the league better, but our situations trying to play through a season like that in the spring better. So, I think from that standpoint, I think, the deal was reached with all of those things in mind, and I think everybody's happy about it.
Yeah, people complaining that you guys are unionized and trying to get more. Like, I'm like, you guys are insane. Like, you don't understand. Like, like you said, the size of these contracts and whatever. Like, no, we need to protect all that stuff. I do not like that when I see people commenting on. They're like, oh yeah, well, here goes the league or whatever. They're trying to unionize. It's like, no. Like, we need to protect all that. Ryan, has anyone? One of the big selling points going into USFL season 1 was the tuition waivers and all of that, and obviously carried that over, and that's part of the benefits package. Are people taking advantage of that? Is that something that's enticing the players?
Yeah, you got quite a few players that are going back to school and getting their degrees. Actually, one of the players on the bargaining committee, Thad Lee, quarterback of the Maulers, he's taking full advantage of going to school and getting his coursework and getting some classes done and working towards getting his master's. So that's a huge benefit for players. I think all players should take advantage of that. If someone's going to give you a chance to get some free education, if you want to take advantage to further yourself, whatever subject area you want to, by all means, especially if it's free. And they're all online, and you can take full advantage of those are benefits that the league has already had and stated that they're going to keep in there. So any player who asks me about it, I think that's a huge benefit.
Well, I love that. That's good. I'm glad to see him take advantage of that. That's good on that. Do you guys, and I just recorded with one of the CFL agents here before we got on, do you guys feel that it's with both of these leagues now being, strengthening and decent minimum salaries for both, is that going to change players' opinions of like, oh, I got to go up to the CFL now. I can stay here. I can play in Texas. I can play in Birmingham. I can play in Memphis. Curious your thoughts, Kenneth, and then we can talk to Ryan.
I think it opens up the landscape just to have more opportunities to a situation, like I said, that better fits you. I think, I think all three of these leagues are similar across the board, and saying that, nobody's going to be, wealthy from playing in one of these leagues for 1 year. So I think the guys that have a situation that fits them, have a location that fits them, I think it gives the guys more opportunity to kind of really look and see what gives them the best opportunity to further their career. If it's going to the CFL, going to NFL or USFL, XFL, and making the jump to the NFL, like I said before, there's so many factors. Have you been with a coach before? Have you, does the offensive scheme fit you? Does the defensive scheme fit you? And so now you got 3 leagues with 3 sets of teams in all 3 leagues. And so it just gives you a better opportunity to further your career or further your situation in whatever way that you want to. And so I think that does open up the door for guys to just make a better decision for what they believe is right for them at the point in their career that they're in.
Ryan, I'm curious, obviously you guys working with the USFL and all of that, like, how do you guys know how the relationship with the XFL is going to be? Like, have you guys had communications? Is that something that's going to be open for you guys to work through?
Our relationship, like I said, with the USFL has been great. After once you get organized and things like that, and starting to get got a contract done, so the relationship there is going to be ever growing and never continue to grow. As far as the XFL, I really don't have much to say about them. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But hopefully they can be successful, and hopefully they can stay around and provide more jobs and opportunities for guys.
Kenneth, anything to add to that?
Like I said, I think the USFL, there was a lot of guys that had reached out to us previously prior to going into that league and voiced a lot of concerns. And I think that's why, we felt the need to step in and help. I think, like I said before, I think that USFL did a great job of getting through the first season and then obviously bringing the guys to the table to hear out the concerns and the things moving forward. I think we were able to get a lot of things changed. And I think it's just a little bit of a different tone going into the XFL with seeing some of the high profile kind of people that they have involved and things like that. And not to knock anybody from the USFL, but I don't think guys are too worried about some of the issues that were major concerns going into the USFL. So, like I said, I think right now everybody's really happy with what is on the table and kind of what the XFL future looks like. And so I know I'm excited to, be a part of it and get in there and play in this first season under new ownership and kind of see what they bring to the table. So, like Ryan said, we'll kind of, we'll see how that goes. I think as of right now, they're in a very good position and have done a lot of good prep work to start off their new season, new league the right way.
I just have a little more XFL centric questions here at the end. We'll try to get you guys out of here. I really appreciate it. Concerns? We're still talking the Vegas stadium. As people involved with player reps. We have 7 of 8 venues announced. Thoughts on that, and that we're getting ready for training camps here at the beginning of the year.
I think they'll get it done. I don't really see. I think, like I said, I think the things that are in place with the XFL, I think the things that they've been able to accomplish and the partnerships and the deals that they have in place, I don't see any hiccups going forward. I think maybe it's just taking a little bit more time than people would like. But I think when it comes down to it and we get to the season, I think everything will be squared away.
Have you guys heard anything from Brian Westbrook yet about any of the engagement stuff they're going to be doing with players?
Not yet. We've gotten forms, me as being a player, I think they're doing a lot of good off the field things. They're asking guys, kind of what areas of life that they want to kind of get involved in outside of football. And as far as being able to grow off the field. So I think that's something that guys are excited about, to be able to kind of learn and educate themselves. So I think they're doing a lot of good things out off the football field for guys.
Do you know, have they given you insights how the commit date's supposed to work here coming up next week, the 26th?
No. Or you said the commit date?
Yeah, where you have to be, signed or committed by the 26th, right? I believe.
Oh yeah, the LOI. Yeah, I think most guys have already kind of signed that. I know, I have. I think I don't think that's been too big of a deal for anybody. I think, like I said, I think the guys that have been drafted, I think all those guys are pretty excited about the opportunity and ready to get to camp. So I haven't heard anything about that from anybody.
Have you guys heard anything, either you, Ryan, or Kenneth, about any of the Alumni Academy stuff, the fallout of that with the XFL, any of that relationship?
No, I haven't heard anything about that.
Nah, I haven't really heard anything about the NFL, the academy thing they got going on. I know they have the partnership with the IFL. Besides that, I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, just curious if anyone had reached out to you guys. Last question from me, talking about the AFL-CIO Sports Council. You guys were kind of founding members of that. Any things to look forward to in the horizon from that to anticipate? We can start with Ryan.
Man, there's some big things on the horizon that's coming from there. I can't really speak to them yet, but just know those, between all of those organizations in there, there's going to be a lot of good, a lot of new information that'll be coming out very soon.
Kenneth, anything else from you?
Oh yeah, just to kind of echo what Ryan said. Like I said, Ryan, hats off to Ryan. He's kind of taking the helmet things, and I've shifted back into training and getting ready to go. So I'm ready to go play, and Ryan's doing an excellent job with everything going on right now.
Ryan, last question. Biggest of all the work that you guys did getting the CBA together, what do you think stands out? I know you mentioned the compensation for the workers' comp and obviously raising the minimum. What were you most proud of that you think was the most important step that you guys got in this?
Man, the biggest thing I can really say is how the players kind of stepped up, because you're really not too sure what the players in the league want to do and how's their temperament and how things are going to shape out when you're organizing and getting this thing really going. But to see some of the older guys in the league kind of step up and take reins and bring a lot of the young guys who really weren't up to date with like knowledge and how all this stuff works was really great to see. So, I want to shout out the player committee that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but Dartez Jones from the New Orleans Breakers, he's a safety. Jonathan Newsom, he's from Birmingham Stallions, defensive end. Lance Lenore is a wide receiver. Devin Gray, a wide receiver with Philadelphia Stars. Bad Lee, quarterback, Pittsburgh Maulers. Christian Scoley, offensive lineman, Houston Gamblers. Trey Williams, running back, the Generals. Some of the key figureheads from around the league from a performance standpoint. So just having those guys a part of the board and kind of leading the effort was really great, man. So like I said, the USFL is in great hands moving forward. We're looking forward to a great year too, man. So just stay tuned.
Well, I really appreciate it, Ryan and Kenneth both coming on, both exciting years here for both of you in different ways. But thank you so much for coming on. I know this is really important. And obviously the fans of these leagues are invested in the players and want them to be taken care of both, physically and financially. So really appreciate your guys' time and work on this. And I think it should be a good 23. So.
Yeah, looking forward to it, man. Peace, man. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys. Huge special thanks to all of the guests this week. Mike Mitchell coming on, Andrew Murray taking time out, week of Christmas, you got to remember. And then we got Darren Gill coming on, CFL super agent, Kenneth and Ryan over at the United Football Players Association. Really appreciate that. Hope we did a good show this week. I'm recording this part earlier. I assume Mike and I are going to go long, and then I assume Andy is going to be good as always. I thought Darren had really interesting comments in regards to how many phone calls does he get now? Does he view this? Darren obviously is someone that wants players, right, to get the most. So it's good for Darren and the players he represents, but maybe the CFL is like, hey, we got to start paying attention to this stuff. Dave Naylor tweeted a couple weeks ago, like, you can't just poo-poo off these spring leagues anymore, especially with USFL increasing salaries here going into year 2. I think that's great for the players, and that's obviously why we do the show, support that and get them the visibility and the support they need. And then obviously Kenneth and Ryan coming on, after the negotiations where they could do that. Really appreciate that. Like and subscribe. Like I said, get your Brian Scott football here. This is a beauty. Going to have some other stuff to give away as well when we hit 2,500 subscribers. Don't forget, leave voicemails. We'd love to do something next week. Favorite moment of 2022, themarkcast.com/voicemail. You can do it on a computer. You can do it on your phone. Do it on an iPad. It's super easy. Hope you guys appreciate the work that we do here. A lot of hands behind the scenes this week. Like I said, with Max, helping to get the spreadsheet together, everyone coming on, having all the questions and everything else. So really appreciate that. XFL approved guest coming on next week, courtesy of the league. That's going to be a good one. Very excited for that. Long time wanting to get this on, one of the members of the executive team. And then I won't spoil it now, but we'll have a good guest kind of running the show next week, kind of doing the recap perspective. Think you guys will be happy with that as well. We'll figure it out. If anything else comes, the world burns down. Like I said, wasn't necessarily going to have on, 5 guests this week? But, I do what I can on here. I try to do the Lord's work. Hope you all appreciate it. Happy holidays. Dorothy and I went and watched on Netflix the movie Claws here over the last couple nights. Animated movie, Jason Schwartzman, J.K. Simmons. If you want a holiday movie, it came out in 2019. I'm so out of touch with movies anymore. This was the best Christmas movie. I think if you're like an adulty age, I don't know if I would show this to kids, even though it's animated, but if you are like over 18, I think this was, I sobbed. If you've ever wanted to see Reed sob, sit next to me watching the movie Claws. It is on Netflix. That is my movie recommendation here this week. Thank you guys all so much. Big show again next week, and take care as always. Drive safe and enjoy. If it snow, anything else. I'm rambling now. Thank you guys so much. Bye.